Welcome back to MythVision podcast and Gnostic Informant. You are about to attain true gnosis. And today we are doing a debate. When was Acts written? Luke Acts is the name of the collection that they go by. When was this composed? Who wrote it? When was it written? We have a debate here between Derek, MythVision podcast, and Vinny. And links are in the description. And one side thinks it's pre-70 AD. The other side says it's after 70 AD, maybe possibly after the 90s. And so they both.
Yeah, I take a specific stance after 93, just to be fair to Vinny, because this is like Vinny and I have tried to hash this out. But anyway,
so is the just to clarify for the audience, is it before 93 and after 93, or is it before 70 and after?
After 93, before 70 is the kind of approach me and him are both.
Yeah, I'm pre-70. He's post-93.
Got it. So now we know we have two arguments: post 93 and pre 70, and they're both going to argue for those positions. And without further ado, we have the format's going to be 20 minutes opening for each of them. Then they both get a 10-minute response section, and then a final 5-minute closing section. Then a cross examination. Then Q&A. Obviously, super chats and will be added to the Q&A. So super chat your questions for either side, and those questions will be asked in the Q&A section.
So let me just start. I'm going to read here. We're good.
Okay, so we're all set?
We're ready. Let's just do it. Here we go. All right. Tonight's question is simple. When was Luke Acts written? We don't settle that with gut instinct. We settle it with evidence using the same rules any careful historian applies to ancient documents. So the number one argument for an early date goes like this. If Luke knew about the outcome of Paul's trial, the deaths of Paul and Peter, and the Neronian persecution, he surely would have included them. Since he didn't, he must have been writing before they happened. Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy has called the missing trial of Paul the biggest argument, the central pillar for every early dating Luke Acts, every person who's early dating Luke Acts. I want to give this argument its full weight, because it sounds compelling. And I want to show you why it falls apart once you understand how the book of Acts is actually constructed. Switch slides. The author tells us his plan. Change slides, Neil. The author tells us his plan in the first chapter. Acts 1:8. It's not switching. Let me switch it for you. Okay. The author tells us his plan in the first chapter, Acts 1:8. You will be my witness.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you're doing it yourself now. Okay, so you want me to switch it for you?
If you don't mind changing the slides, but if not, okay. The author tells us his plan in the chapter Acts 1:8. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. That's the roadmap of the entire book. The narrative dramatizes the spread of Christianity from Jerusalem outward until it reaches Rome, the center of the known world, the heart of the empire. Next slide, Neil. Paul's journey to Rome is foreshadowed again and again throughout Acts. And when Paul arrives in Rome in Acts 28, the final verse says he proclaimed the kingdom of God with all boldness and without hindrance. That's not a cliffhanger. It's a victory statement. The author is planting a flag in the capital of the empire. The gospel made it. The mission from Acts 1:8 is fulfilled and being fulfilled. This also explains why the Romans are constantly portrayed so positively throughout Acts. Roman officials are reasonable, fair, and they repeatedly declare Paul innocent. Opposition comes from Jewish authorities. Luke is telling a story about the gospel moving away from rejection and towards acceptance toward Rome. Next slide. Now think about what happens if you tack on the Neronian persecution. If Luke writes, oh, by the way, right after this, Nero went insane, burned Rome, blamed the Christians, and brutally executed Peter and Paul. What happens to the book? It collapses. The positive portrayal of Rome, gone. The theme of unstoppable expansion, destroyed. The triumphant ending, meaningless. Suddenly, Rome becomes violently hostile. The apostles are executed, and the movement is crushed at the very place it was supposed to triumph. That contradicts everything the story has been building toward. The beloved musical, The Sound of Music, ends with Von Trapp family hiking over the Austrian Alps toward freedom, uplifting and triumphant. But historically, after fleeing Austria, the real family spent years as homeless refugees. The kids grew to resent Maria. The father died before seeing them succeed. Would anyone argue the musical was written in 1938 just because it doesn't include what happened next? Of course not. The story ends where it has to end, including the rest would destroy that story. Acts works the same way. The author couldn't include the Neronian persecution, not because he didn't know it, because it would be narrative suicide, as you could see on the graph. In his introduction to the New Testament, Raymond Brown explains that objection probably misunderstands the purpose of Acts, which was not to tell the life of Paul, but to dramatize the spread of Christianity, culminating with the symbolism of the great missionary coming to Rome, the capital of the Gentile empire, end quote. The great Paul J. Ochtmeyer writes, quote, although we would like to know the outcome of Paul's imprisonment, that information is not essential for the author's purpose. He has had in mind a story that remains incomplete until the fulfillment of God's plan in the remote future, end quote. Okay, we've opened up a post-64 date as a viable possibility, but how far past 64 AD can we push the dating? Let's look for some clues. Are there any hints that the author knows about events past the point where his narrative ends? As a matter of fact, there are. Next slide. Even though Luke is very careful not to narrate the death of Paul, he gives an allusion to it in Acts 20, verse 25, where Paul gives a farewell speech to a group of church elders in Miletus and says, none of you will ever see my face again. This is presented as a final goodbye, and it happens right before Paul embarks on his last voyage to Jerusalem, which will set off the chain of events that leads to his 2-year imprisonment and later execution in Rome. This ominous farewell speech is widely acknowledged by New Testament scholars as a literary foreshadowing of Paul's fate by the author. As Joseph A. Fitzmyer puts it in his Anchor Bible commentary on Acts, the apostle sums up his missionary endeavors, places a martyr's crown on his head in advance, and sings a victory song over the sufferings to come. In Acts as a whole, the speech foreshadows the end of Paul's missionary activity. But how do we know this comes from the author rather than Paul himself? Well, we can use Paul's letters to get a good sense of his expectations and mindset at this point in his ministry. Right before his final journey to Jerusalem, Paul wrote in his real epistles to the Romans, and in that letter, he says this, at present, however, I am going to Jerusalem bringing aid to the saints. When I have completed this and have delivered this collection to them, I will visit you on my way to Spain. You see, Paul has no clue that this trip to Jerusalem would be the end of the road for him. He's making plans to go to Spain. Think of it like this. Imagine you're reading a story about the American Civil War. The story ends with Abraham Lincoln on his way to Ford's Theater. But right before he goes in, he gathers his closest friends and says, none of you will ever see my face again. If you read that, what would you conclude? Would you think the author was writing before Lincoln was assassinated or after? Obviously, after. Because that kind of perfectly timed farewell only makes sense if the author already knows how the story ends, and that's exactly what we see in Acts. In Luke, we also find very compelling evidence that the author knew about the end of the Jewish-Roman War. Luke 21 quotes Jesus predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, I know it might sound like my argument is presupposing that supernatural prophecies can't happen, but that's actually not what I'm doing here. Next slide, Neil. The key is comparing how Mark and Luke handle Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem. Mark is Luke's source. Virtually all scholars agree on this. So when Luke changes Mark's language, we need to ask, why? What is he updating? In Mark 13:14, Jesus warns, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. Now look at what Luke does with this same passage. In Luke 21:20, he places the cryptic abomination of desolation with something strikingly specific. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. That's not apocalyptic symbolism anymore. That's a military description. Luke also adds new details that are literally not in the original prophecy. He adds that the people of Jerusalem will fall by the edge of the sword and be taken away as captives among all nations. And he adds Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles. In Mark's version, Jesus doesn't say anything about people being taken into captivity, and he doesn't specify that it would be the Gentiles doing this. Yet we know this is what happened historically in the year 70 AD. Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem and laid siege to it. After destroying the city, they took nearly 100,000 survivors captive. Again, we have confirmation from Joseph Fitzmyer. Jesus' judgment about the temple and his announcement about the desecration of it by the abomination of desolation became a saying about Jerusalem surrounded by camps in the Lucan account. Thus, the Markan apocalyptic prophecy has given way to a description of a siege and a capture of the city of Jerusalem itself. So basically, we can see that Luke has not only edited the prophecy, but actually made it more detailed and accurate. I'm not presupposing naturalism here. I'm simply comparing two versions of the same prophecy and pointing out the obvious fact that the later version gives more information than the original. The author puts specific details about the siege into the mouth of Jesus because he already knows what happened. This alone places Luke after 70 CE. Combined with the Josephus evidence I'm about to show you, it pushes the date well past 93. Evidence 1. Many scholars have noticed that Luke Acts shares striking similarities with the work of Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, especially his book Antiquities of the Jews, written around 93 AD. Next slide, Neil. Even though Luke and Acts focus on Jesus and the early Christian movement, the author occasionally refers to political events in the wider Roman world. We looking at the right one? Go to the next one, Neil. There it is. Okay, the wider world. And in almost every single instance, these same events appear in books 18 through 20 of Antiquities. The census of Quirinius in Luke 2 corresponds with Antiquities 18:1. Pilate's massacre of the Galileans in Luke 13 corresponds with Antiquities 18:4. The reference to Theudas and Judas the Galilean in Acts 5 corresponds with Antiquities 20:5. The reference to the Egyptian prophet in Acts 21 corresponds with Antiquities 28. The reference to the famine of Claudius in Acts 11 corresponds with Antiquities 22. And the death of Herod Agrippa in Acts 12 corresponds with Antiquities 19:8. Again and again, we see the author of Luke Acts selects the same events that Josephus chose to record. Steve Mason puts it directly. If Luke did not know Josephus, we have a nearly incredible series of coincidences which require that Luke knew something that closely approximated Josephus's narrative in several distinct ways. In some cases, the similarities go even further. Luke doesn't just repeat the same content as Josephus, he also copies the specific arrangement that Josephus uses to present the information in Antiquities 18 through 20. Let me show you what I mean. Next slide, Neil. In Acts 5, two figures are mentioned, Theudas and Judas the Galilean. The problem is that they appear in the wrong chronological order. Acts says Judas appeared after Theudas, but in reality, Judas lived decades earlier than Theudas. This is probably the most famous historical error in Acts, but most people don't realize that Josephus actually gives us a very, very clear explanation for this mix-up. In Antiquities Book 20, Chapter 5, Josephus presents both figures in the same order, Theudas first and Judas second. But there's a reason he does this. Listen to how Josephus tells it. They also took Theudas alive, cut off his head and carried it to Jerusalem. This was what befell the Jews in the time of Cuspius Fatus. And besides this, the sons of Judas of Galilee were now slain. I mean of that Judas who caused the people to revolt when Quirinius came to take an account of the estates of the Jews, as we have shown in a foregoing book. As you see, Josephus mentions Judas the Galilean after Theudas, not because that's when Judas's revolt happened, but because that's when Judas's sons were killed. In other words, Josephus is giving us a flashback of Judas, who he already introduced in the previous book, so that we know whose sons he's talking about here. In Acts 5, however, that explanation is missing. The same sequence appears, but without the context that justifies it. If we ignore Josephus, this narrative historical blunder is very puzzling. But if we allow the possibility that the author got his information from Josephus, suddenly the confusion makes perfect sense. Luke read or heard this passage where Josephus presented Theudas first and Judas second, but he didn't remember why. He just thought it was because Theudas was earlier than Judas. Steve Mason explains again, quote, Josephus is the one who isolates Judas and Theudas from among many popular leaders of the time. Moreover, Josephus links the two characters in his story. Since Josephus links Theudas and Judas in this order for his own narrative purposes, the reproduction of this connection in Acts is either another noteworthy coincidence or the result of Luke's knowledge of Josephus, end quote. Now, one explanation that tries to get out of Luke's literary dependence on Josephus is the idea that both used a common source for some of the events and figures both authors describe. This does not work with the Theudas-Judas example, because the arrangement of the two figures is contingent upon Josephus's presentation in Antiquities 25. There's another example that causes problems for the common source hypothesis, the census of Quirinius. Next slide. Josephus wrote about this event twice, in Jewish War Book 2 and Antiquities Book 18. Jewish War was completed about 20 years before Antiquities. In that text, Josephus mentions Judas rebelling against the Roman taxes, but no census, no registration, and no Quirinius. In the Antiquities, he expands massively. Now, Quirinius is named, a property registration, apography, is described, and Judas's revolt is tied specifically to it. Every detail Luke includes matches the Antiquities and is absent from Josephus's war. If a hypothetical common source contained all this, why didn't Josephus use it when he wrote the war in the 70s? He didn't have this expanded version until he built it himself in 93. Luke is tracking a version that didn't exist until 93 AD. Next slide. In Acts 21:38, a Roman tribune asked Paul, "Aren't you the Egyptian who led 4,000 men of the Sicarii into the desert?" This combines three separate things: an Egyptian false prophet, a group called Sicarii, and a desert march. No one combined event ever happened. None of this combined event ever happened. The Sicarii were urban stealth assassins who used concealed weapons in crowded marketplaces in the city. They'd have no business in the desert. The Egyptian led followers to the Mount of Olives. Desert movements were led by entirely different prophetic figures. But in Josephus, all three appear back to back in both the war and the Antiquities. First, Sicarii knife crime, then false prophets leading people into the desert, then the Egyptian as one example. Luke fused adjacent passages into one dramatic line, not realizing they described separate events. Luke also calls this man simply the Egyptian. No personal name. That label only makes sense in Josephus's narrative context. An independent source would use the man's real name. And the word Sicarii is Latin, not Greek. It comes from sica, a curved concealed blade. Mason has shown that no other Greek author transliterates this Latin term. Not Plutarch, not Cassius Dio. Josephus uses it 19 times because he's writing in Rome. When Luke drops this word into a Greek text with zero explanation, his source is the only Greek writer who uses it, Josephus. Luke acts in Josephus, and only Luke acts in Josephus, among all early Christian texts, share the census under Quirinius, Judas the Galilean, Theudas, the Sicarii, the Egyptian. To explain this without Josephus, you need a hypothetical lost source featuring the same elements, the same combinations, the same vocabulary. Nobody has ever described what that source looks like because it would look exactly like Josephus. That's not a hypothesis. It's an unnecessary middleman. Next slide. Here's where we stand. The silence argument doesn't require an early date. It requires understanding how narratives work. Luke designed Acts to end in a triumphantly in Rome. The Neronian persecution was never an option for this author. Luke's gospel showed detailed knowledge of Jerusalem's destruction in 70 CE, rewriting Mark's apocalyptic symbolism with specific military language that matches what actually happened. And the Theudas error, the Quirinius census, the Egyptian Sicarii fusion all converge on one conclusion. The author was reading Josephus's Antiquities, completed in 93 AD. My opponent needs to explain how Luke arrived at Josephus's reading order for Theudas and Judas, how he tracked details from the Antiquities that don't appear in the war, how he fused three separate phenomena into one sentence, and how he used a Latin word no other Greek writer uses. What's more probable, ladies and gentlemen? I will just end on this note to say this, and I really appreciate my opponent, Vinny. I've now viewed him as a friend. This topic is way too big to cover in a debate. And I spoke to Steve Mason prior to this debate, and he said, Derek, I don't like debates, but if anyone is interested in sincerely taking these arguments further, I recommend you read the scholarship. And I mean that for my opponent's scholars as well. I want to say thank you for this time. I concede the remainder of my time.
All right. As you can see, there was just about 30 seconds left. So you well established 20 minutes. And that's it for Derek's opening.
Thank you.
Vinny, the floor is now yours, and you have time to respond. And let me know what slides you want me to put up for you. I'll do the same I did for Derek.
All right. Yeah, let's take off. Let's do slide one. What's going on, you beautiful people? I am very, very happy to be here. Having said that, look, I'm a kid who barely graduated high school. I'm not as smart as my handsome Caucasian friend over here, but I'll do my best. Here we go. This is from Samuel Sandel, the Journal of Biblical Literature. This guy is he's a Jew. He's an Orthodox Jew. He's not on the team at all. But I think what he says is very important. That extravagance among scholars, which first overdoes the supposed similarity in passages and then proceeds to describe source and derivation, as if implying literary connection following in an inevitable predetermined direction. It seems to me that we are at a junction when biblical scholarship should recognize parallelomania for the disease that it is. Unfortunately, my good friend has fallen into this terrible disease, my friend, and I will show you this very clearly, but we don't have a lot of time, so let's get moving. Slide 2, please. So for our purposes, let's just define our terms really quickly. I will call terminal window 1 Judea between 6 BCE and 60 CE, the Common Era. I believe that Acts was written in 60. So that's what I'm calling the terminal window. Next slide. Now, terminal window 2 is Europe during World War II. Now, I want you all to participate in this little exercise here. Here's the exercise. I need you to name me 3 people, 3 leaders from terminal window 2. I need you to name me 3 leaders from terminal window 2. Name me 3 important leaders from terminal window 2. Take your time. I'm on the clock, so I'm gonna say move to the next slide, please. Slide 4. Now, if you were participating, you probably mentioned Hitler, Churchill, and Stalin, right? Or Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini. Now, you had hundreds of people to choose from, but yet you chose Hitler, Churchill, and Stalin, and you probably chose it in that order. I don't know how many people are watching at this point, but you probably chose Hitler, Churchill, and Stalin in that order. Now, if I were to go to you, and there's a guy from Britain, and there's the guy from Eritrea, and the guy from Eritrea is writing about terminal window 2, and he talks about Hitler, Churchill, and Stalin. And then the guy from Britain is also writing about terminal window 2, and he is talking about Hitler, Churchill, and Stalin. Would it be rational for me to say there is a clear evidence here that the dude from Britain was borrowing from the dude from Eritrea? Because look, the dude from Eritrea is talking about Hitler, Churchill, and Stalin. And look, this guy is talking about Hitler, Churchill, and Stalin. On top of that, There are verbal parallels. The dude in Eritrea is talking about 1,000-year Reich or something like that. And the dude in Britain did the same thing. Clear borrowing. Now, obviously, you would say, I mean, he might have borrowed, but I mean, in terminal window 2, I mean, there's not, I mean, yeah, there's hundreds of leaders to choose from. But I mean, come on, Hitler, Stalin, and Churchill, those would be the top 3. I agree. Next slide. Now, in terminal window 1, remember, we're talking about terminal window 1. In terminal window 1, between 6 and 60, we have a grand total of 8 to 12 people we could choose from. So terminal window 1, where you chose the exact same 3 people that I chose, had hundreds to choose from, and you came with the same 3. Terminal window, slide 5. This terminal window here, terminal window 1, has 8 to 12 people, and these are the top 3. So this is an example of parallelomania. Look, they mentioned Theudas, Judas, and the Egyptian. That must mean that Luke is borrowing from Josephus. Look, Josephus is the only person in all of antiquity to talk about these people. Well, Suetonius, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, none of those people were overly concerned with terminal window 1 as much as the gospel writers and Josephus, for obvious reasons. So it's not very impressive that no other author was talking about these people, because nobody really cared about terminal window 1 in the Roman world, because they viewed themselves as being completely superior and the Jews as basically being an annoyance. Slide 6, please. Now, I still want you all to be participating here in this debate with me. So now we're going to do a blind test, okay? We got 2 people. One of them has a theological agenda. One of them is trying to be a historian, okay? And you're going to have to decide which is which. The first person has always inflated numbers, and the numbers actually don't match the demography of the place that he's around. The other person, person B, is precise and demographically plausible. Person A always talks about the supernatural self-designation of the person in question. Person B never mentions the supernatural self-designation of the person in question. Person A always invokes sacred geography. Person B never invokes sacred geography. Person A always ends his stories of these people in an embellished, rhetorically heightened fashion. Person B ends it concisely and rather pedestrian, to be honest with you. Now, between the 2 of those, who is the historian and who is the theologian? I think most people would say, well, obviously, the guy with the inflated numbers, the supernatural self-designations, the invocation of sacred geography, and embellished and rhetorically heightened conclusion, obviously, that is the theologian, and the other guy is the historian. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that actually is not who you would think it would be. It is actually Josephus, who is actually person A, and Luke, who is person B. Josephus has 30,000 people posting up at the Mount of Olives to go after a tax haven like Jerusalem. Nobody mentions this. Nobody. Now, as I said, I just said, well, I mean, the Romans don't care. They didn't really look at the Jews as very significant. I agree. But Jerusalem was a tax haven. This dude went after the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem, okay, with 30,000 people and got crushed. And nobody mentions that. This is the reason why Josephus has this as a reputation. Slide 7. Here's Encyclopedia Britannica. This is not Encyclopedia Vintanica. It's Encyclopedia Britannica. As a historian, Josephus shares the faults of most ancient writers. His analyses are superficial. His chronology is faulty. His facts are exaggerated. We just demonstrated that. His speeches are contrived. He is especially tendentious when his own reputation is at stake. His Greek style, when it truly is his, does not earn him the epithet of the Greek Livy, meaning his Greek is that often is attached to his name. Luke actually has higher Greek than Josephus. We continue. Yet he unites in his person the traditions of Judaism and Hellenism. He provides a connecting link between the secular world of Rome and the religious heritage of the Bible and offers many insights into the mentality of subject peoples under the Roman Empire. A lot of people don't understand this. A lot of people think that Josephus is just out there, just trying to record what happened. And notice the assumption in my opponent. He says that because Luke contradicts Josephus on the Quirinius angle, that means Luke is committing an error. What does that assume? That assumes almost the canonical nature of the Josephine literature. There's no reason, in my view, to view Josephus as more solid than Luke, and I'll tell you why. Here's the next slide. Next slide. There have been numerous instances where, I'm not going to say atheists, okay, but let's say late daters who are not friends of the early date have mocked Luke and then been proven wrong. Luke in Acts 17:6 uses the term politarchs. This word is not found anywhere in classical literature. As a matter of fact, people were saying that Luke invented this term, politarch. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, 19 inscriptions were found about 80 years ago using the term politarch, 5 specifically naming Thessalonica. And by the way, that was in the mid-1st century. Luke got it completely right when we had no other extant literature. That does not communicate that Luke is depending on Josephus. Next, Philippi as a district. Maris, now here's the word. Maris meant portion, not district. Luke is misusing Greek here. That was the accusation until archaeological evidence confirmed Maris as a precise term for the Macedonian administrative districts. Luke got it down in a picayune, please don't be offended, almost autistic manner. Like, I'm going to do this as literally and as exactly as possible. Here's the last one. This one's really significant. Gallio as proconsul of Achaia. Title and timing doubted. This was another thing. People said this is anachronistic. There's no such term as proconsul.
You got 10 minutes left.
Thank you. There's no term as proconsul, all the rest of it. Nope. We don't find this anywhere. The Delphi inscription from Claudius, Lucius Junius Gallio, my friend, proconsul of Achaia. Now, Gallio's really interesting because Gallio has a famous brother named Seneca. Not even Seneca mentioned his brother as the proconsul of Achaia. These are things that if you want to know about them, you have to go to Luke because you cannot find any other historian that will get you this information. Luke was so singular in this situation. And by the way, this is Thessalonica, Philippi, and Achaia. These are not even in terminal window 1. It makes sense for Josephus to have these unique issues around terminal window 1. But if you notice here, this is the Roman world, and Luke has it down exactly. Next slide. Now, my wonderful friend, actually go to the next slide before we go to this one. For Acts, the confirmation of historicity is overwhelming. Any attempt to reject its basic historicity, even in matters of detail, must now appear absurd. Roman historians have long taken it for granted that the statement of Acts about Roman administration are accurate. That is A.N. Sherwin Wright, Roman Society. This guy is a professor at Oxford University, okay? He looks at Luke as a historical source, and he says that his compatriots have long looked at Luke as a historical source for what I just explained to you. There have been 9 occasions when Luke had something unique in his text, and folks denied it, and then were proven to be wrong. Okay, let's go to slide 9 again. Now, we're told that the reason that the martyrdom of Paul is not mentioned is because the whole story is about, and I wrote all of this before my friend did his intro, but we're told that the book of Acts is about the spread of the gospel. And so if you have persecution, then that's going to screw up the entire message of the triumph of the gospel. Dear listener, I hate to say this, but this is what happens when you're not committing yourself to the biblical text. Here we go. Here's Colossians 1. Now let's get the scenario right. According to my friend, Acts was written in the 90s. By the way, in the 90s, we're dealing with Domitian, who is persecuting the church. But anyway, okay, so this is written in the 90s. Okay, all right, so Acts is written in the 90s. Paul, what you're reading right now is in the 50s. Here we go. Paul says in Colossians 1:5-6, the gospel is bearing fruit in the entire world. Romans, here we go. Remember, we're talking about culminating in Rome, and we're trying to show that the gospel penetrated Rome. Here's Romans chapter 1. Rome is already world famous. Look, he tells the Romans, your faith is being proclaimed throughout the entire world. So not only had the gospel penetrated in Rome, the gospel had been so successful in Rome that now people all over the world are talking about Roman Christians. This was in the 50s, dear listener. Why does Luke then in the 90s have to write an entire anthology about the conquest of the gospel, ending Paul in house arrest? We continue. Here's Philippians. This is insane. The Praetorian Guard. Here he is. Paul says it is known throughout the entire Praetorian Guard, those of Caesar's household, why he's here. In other words, Paul in Philippians tells his audience, I am preaching the gospel to Nero's specific guard. How does he end that? At the end of the book, he says, those of Caesar's household greets you. In other words, Paul is claiming that he's got converts in the household of Nero. That's all the way back in Philippians in the 50s. Here's the last one, back to Rome. He says, I no longer have any work in these regions. I hope to see you in passing as I go to Spain. The place that Paul thought was next was Spain, the Gallic region, around the Gauls. Why? Because Paul just told you the gospel had already conquered those areas. That happened in the 50s. So it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to say, oh, well, we didn't mention the death of Paul because we wanted to talk about the conquest of the gospel. How are you going to get more of a conquest of the gospel than Paul saying that members of Caesar's household, the Praetorian Guard, it could very well be that this is actually the real reason that the Great Fire started, was because somebody in his household had converted to Christianity. Okay, so this is all happening in the 50s and early 60s by any stretch of the imagination. And yet we're told that the reason that Acts ends in the strange way that it does is because, well, it would destroy, to talk about Paul dying would destroy the entire point of the book. I guess for 50 years, nobody had known that the gospel had penetrated Rome. You guys do realize that by this time, the church in Rome already had a bishop and was what we would consider a mega church. There was no need to show the gospel penetrating Rome to people when Rome was one of the biggest churches in the world. I mean, look, Paul said I'm passing through. I'm wasting time here. Okay, guys, how much time do I have left?
You have 4 minutes here. Let me just pull up real quick so everyone can see. Yeah, 4 minutes. And
okay.
Then okay, back.
Thank you. Okay, so we're told that we don't hear about the death of Paul because that would have been suicidal to the message of the triumph of the gospel. But this is where my friend contradicts himself. I just saw a couple days ago a video in which he read from Irenaeus. I don't know if it was Irenaeus, but it was an early 2nd century author, and he was talking about wanting his bones to be crushed. He was talking about, don't spare me, don't pray for me to escape. And he was saying, what is wrong with these people? Exactly. The early 2nd century church looked at martyrdom as the ultimate victory. So there are lots of stories and embellishments about martyrdom in the early 2nd century church. There are no stories and embellishments about house arrest. House arrest was not looked upon as glorious. Dying for the gospel is looked upon as glorious. Now, here we go. I don't believe that my friend thinks that the conversation with Pilate and Luke is real. I don't believe that he thinks the conversation with Agrippa, almost you've considered me to be a Christian, is real. You believe that those are probably fabricated. So if that's the case, why don't we have a fabricated discussion between Nero and Paul? Why is there a fabricated discussion with a guy like Agrippa, who none of you know, Festus, who none of you know, but there's no conversation with Nero? Why is that? Are you telling me that Paul in house arrest getting rejected by Jews so much so that he has to come up with a supernatural explanation for why he's doing so horribly? That is a more positive portrayal of the triumph of the gospel than Paul looking Nero straight in the face, looking the beast in the face and saying, I ain't scared of you. Jesus rose from the dead, and some of your household are coming with me. And then Nero says, really? You're out of here. We're going to take your head off. And he's walking off. And there's old Timothy running after Paul, tears coming down his eyes. Paul! And Paul turns around and says, Timothy, I fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. And now there's in store for me a crown of righteousness, with the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. And not only to me, but also to those who've longed for his appearance. Continue to preach the word. And then he gets his head chopped off. You're trying to tell me that is not a more triumphant picture of the gospel than Paul hanging out, tied up to a Roman soldier, having to use the bathroom next to a Roman soldier, in house arrest, getting turned away by Jews, and them not listening to him, and him doing so badly that Luke has to quote Isaiah 6 about God hardening people to explain the epic failure that Paul has in preaching his message. I think the most parsimonious answer to all of this is very simple. If you're writing in terminal window 1, you're going to talk about the same people. You're going to talk about the same events. Anybody that's writing about politics today are going to talk about the same people, the same events, and even the same phraseology. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So it's not impressive that those three are mentioned. Anybody quoting those three, I would say, is just it's a case of parallelomania. And I think the gospel, the martyrdom of Paul would have been a much more victorious ending than Paul in house arrest asking another man to go use the bathroom. I'll yield the rest of my time.
That was perfect. You're right at 19 seconds, just like Derek. You guys both did exactly the same. And
professionals over here.
Good job, by the way. Good job.
Great debate so far. Now we are moving over to the next section, which is going to be 10-minute responses. I'll give you guys a 1-minute reminder each towards the end. So
can I ask a real question real quick? It's just a curiosity. Yeah. Derek, did you do the drill with Churchill, Hitler, and Stalin? Did you do the drill?
Drill. Oh, when you asked it. Yeah. I was thinking about. I definitely am picking up what you're putting down in terms of common popular people. We'll probably get into some of that in the rebuttal.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you actually did the little drill.
Yes. I think it's important that debaters, just a note, pay attention to your debate opponent, listen to what they're saying. You don't want to come into this not actually engaging what they're bringing up. So that was a
good point. Well said. Okay, so Derek, you have 10 minutes now to respond to what you heard. Not necessarily a closing statement yet, just a response, and then you'll be up next, Vinny.
Yes. All right, I'm ready. Okay, cool. Start the clock. Get it to 8 minutes real quick. I'll wait for the timer, or 10 minutes. Sorry.
Hang on 1 second. Let me just fix it so it's not. I have it on 20 right now. I have to fix it to 10.
Cool.
1 second. All right, 10 minutes. Okay, there we go. All right, you are on the clock.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, my opponent here in this debate has highlighted some things that I think is important to say this as we're doing a rebuttal here. That is, I understand why that perception he just painted at the end of his opening makes sense from his view. I question, maybe we get into the cross-examination section and this gets elaborated more, if he fully understands when he threw out parallelomania, the depth or even why Steve Mason's argument has been so persuasive to so many PhDs who've studied it. Now, that's something we might get to. But I want to say this. Think about this for a second. In Acts, Paul has been tried. He's been tried. Acts is always painting the Romans good and the chief leaders, the Jewish leaders, in a negative light. Paul has been tried 6 or 7 different times in the book of Acts. He's already gone on trial. And every time he's found innocent except one time. One time where there was a split decision and it was by Jews. But the Romans, always innocent. To have him then go and face Nero, who's going to kill him, which means he's guilty. That doesn't fit the idea of, number one, catering to the message toward Rome, which is significant by Luke. Acts' goal is going from Jerusalem to Rome. This is why Luke contradicts Mark and Matthew on not going back to Galilee. He's going from from Jerusalem to Rome. He doesn't want the Romans to not like this message. He's catering to the Roman world. He would not want Nero decapitating the head guy. And I'll give you another interesting thing he just brought up. The Acts of Paul, the decapitation of Paul, and the milk coming out. Read this beforehand. It narrates his death. But you know what else it narrates? Something Luke would never narrate: the resurrection of Paul. Because in Luke, his theology is contradictory to Paul's atonement theology in his letters. And I hope we get into the contradictions of Luke Acts and Paul's actual letters, because that's where the rubber hits the road. How does a companion who's writing with Paul actually not know what Paul wrote in Paul's own letters? This is a problem, but I'll get into this further as we probably get into our back and forth. So highlighting this point that he resurrects in the Acts of Paul. By the way, that's a biography. It's not a church story. This isn't a biography. We're dealing with a church story in Acts. If he gives the death of Paul and resurrection, as the legend goes, then he now is stealing thunder from Jesus' resurrection and giving it to Paul. The special thing in Luke Acts is that Jesus resurrected from the dead. So if he lets him die, what a damn ending, right? He needs to resurrect, just like we have in Acts of Paul where he does. But if he resurrects, he stole from Jesus. He doesn't want to do that. So what does he do? He ends it on a note. Everybody's tried them. Christians are innocent, don't you know? And it ends with triumph. The gospel has gone forward unconquered. Now, parallelomania. He brought this up, right? My opponent says I'm committing parallelomania, just seeing patterns that aren't really there. But parallelomania is when you cherry pick vague similarities between unrelated text. That's not what's happening here. What we have is a pattern of errors. Luke doesn't just mention the same figures. He doesn't just mention the same figures. Josephus mentions he gets them wrong in exactly the same order. Judas the Galilean in Acts 5 with Theudas. It's crazy, which is historically backwards. Why? Because that's the reading order in Antiquities 25. Josephus put Theudas first because he was talking about events under Cuspius Fatus, and then he flashed back to Judas, whose sons had just been killed. I'm hoping we can pull this up. Actually, I have a graph here. I think it's worth pulling up for people to see this. We need to look at the Theudas thing. So you can actually look at this yourself, okay? He gets it backwards. Whose sons had just been killed? That's what he does by reading Josephus or half-assedly reading it. Luke stripped away that context and just kept the order. That's not parallelomania. That's a student copying from a textbook and missing the footnote. Steve Mason puts it directly. Josephus is the one who isolates Judas and Theudas from among many popular leaders of the time, not just Hitler, Stalin, and Churchill, okay? Many. Why does he choose the exact same ones and no additionals? Why not give an additional? And you know what Josephus said? There were many others, but these are the ones he picked. And if I'm a historian independently writing a work, I can promise you I'm not picking the same identical characters in the identical way and getting it backwards unless I goofed up reading that material. That's important. My opponent says there were dozens of rebels to choose from, so it's no big deal that Luke picked the same ones Josephus picked. But that actually makes my case stronger. If there are dozens of figures available, why does Luke pick only the ones Josephus highlighted? Like I said, the census under Quirinius, Judas the Galilean, Theudas, the Egyptian prophet, the Sicarii, these all appear in Josephus's Antiquities book 18 through 20. And they appear only in Luke Acts among all early Christian literature. No other Christian author mentions any of them. And here's the part he can't get around, in my opinion. Okay, the word Sicarii is Latin, not Greek. Steve Mason has shown that no other Greek author transliterates this Latin term. Not Plutarch, not Cassius Dio. Josephus uses it because he's writing in Rome. When Luke drops this word into a Greek text with zero explanation, his source is the only Greek writer who uses it, and again, it's Josephus. If Luke had independent knowledge, we'd expect him to occasionally give us more detail than Josephus, or different detail as far as characters are concerned. But every time, it's Luke who has the simplified, garbled, stripped-down version, and Josephus who has the full detailed account. That asymmetry is the fingerprint of literary dependence. My opponent used the Hitler, Churchill, Stalin analogy, the idea that people in the same era naturally share common references. Nobody disputes that people in the first century, Judea, knew about revolts in the Roman governor. The question is, why does Luke's specific selection, specific ordering, and specific vocabulary track Josephus's antiquities so precisely? It would be like finding a student paper that mentions the same 3 battles in the same sequence, using the same usual technical term, the same factual error, and then saying, well, lots of people write about World War II. The issue isn't shared knowledge. The issue is shared mistakes and shared distinctive vocabulary. Now let's talk about the slide he brought up. The blind comparison claiming Luke is precise, sober historian, and Josephus is the exaggerator. Yes, Josephus exaggerates numbers. No doubt he does it to himself between wars and antiquities. His own contemporaries would have said so. I say so. Scholars say so. The quote my opponent showed you even says it. Josephus's facts are exaggerated. His speech is contrived. But here's what the same passage goes on to say. Josephus unites the traditions of Judaism and Hellenism and offers insights into subject peoples under the Roman Empire. He's a flawed but indispensable historian because he gives us a massive amount of verifiable detail. Luke, by contrast, gives us almost no verifiable political detail outside what he could get from Josephus. And when he does venture into specifics, he gets things wrong, like the Theudas ordering, like making the Egyptian prophet lead the Sicarii when Josephus clearly describes them as separate phenomena. And the claim that Luke writes higher Greek, that he said, than Josephus, Loveday Alexander demonstrated that Luke's preface doesn't match elite Greco-Roman historiography at all. It matches the preface style of technical and scientific manuals. Luke's Greek is competent, no doubt. Calling it superior to Josephus is not supported by any scholar in the world that I know of. My opponent quoted A. N. Sherwin White from 1963 saying the historicity of Acts is overwhelming. A couple things. First, nobody in this debate is arguing Acts is pure fiction. I'm arguing it was written later than my opponent thinks. Getting Roman administrative details right doesn't tell you when something was written. I can write an accurate account of Roman provincial governance tomorrow. That doesn't make my book first century, right? Second, Sherwin White was a Roman legal historian, not a New Testament scholar. He was evaluating whether Luke's descriptions of Roman procedures were plausible. He wasn't weighing in on literary dependence or dating. Using the quote to argue for an early date is like quoting a costume designer saying a period film got the uniforms right, and then concluding the film must have shot from that period. There's much, much more here. Since we're running out of time, I'd like to just say, I think in our cross-examination, we'll be able to dig deeper. But again, I think it's an unfair statement to say parallelomania when you have so much vocabulary overlap and the exact terms, we'll get into the Egyptian, that Josephus uses for his character that fits his overall histories, that Luke jots 1 or 2 sentences and then he's gone. And we're supposed to think Luke independently got this information and garbled this stuff, but Josephus was wrong. Couched in Cuspius Fatus and the beheadings and all the details of the governors and such, it's hard to believe. Thank you. You're muted, Mike, or you're muted now, I think.
Sorry about that. Okay, now that just reaches the end of the time there. I will reset the clock to 10 minutes again, and I will give you the floor over to Vinny. Vinny, your floor is yours.
Okay. Some of the responses were curious. Paul being killed would mean he was guilty. So we don't have the dramatic scene where Paul stands up to Nero. We thought that Paul being under house arrest, being rejected by some Jews, was a more triumphant way to end the presentation of the gospel. You'll notice how my friend didn't touch the fact that the gospel had already conquered Rome. So much so that Paul was going to go past it to go to Spain. Paul had no interest whatsoever really in Rome. He said, yeah, I'm going to see you guys in passing. And that was in the 50s. He didn't touch that at all. Like, not at all. The idea that we can't mention the martyrdom of Paul, the 2 reasons he gave. One reason was because, that would mean that Paul is guilty. He had all these trials, and then if Nero executed him, that would mean he was guilty. Well, damn. Well, I guess that means that Jesus was also guilty because he got crucified. That's not the logic of the early church. If you're talking about the triumph of the gospel, the early, and again, this is also something he didn't touch, and I really hope he does. I saw a video of my brother criticizing Irenaeus for pleading for his own death. As a, he was like, this is like suicide by cop. What is wrong with these people? Exactly. That was their mentality at the time. So the idea that we can't include the confrontation with Nero because then it would mean that Paul was guilty, I'm sorry, it makes absolutely no sense. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. They loved their lives not unto death, right? So the way that early Christians thought the triumph of the gospel was that people were getting converted and martyrs were being made. That's literally the template. The other reason he gave was because, well, there's this other document that has his neck getting chopped off and then his milk coming out, then he rises from the dead, and we can't talk about that. Well, I agree, but that's not what I said. What I said was, since we have confrontations with Pilate, Agrippa, and Festus, why don't we have a confrontation with Nero where he stands up to him and then dies in a blaze of glory for the gospel? That wasn't really dealt with at all. Okay, we continue. Pattern of errors. He says that this was really confusing. He said there are no verifiable details from Luke in Acts except for what we see in Josephus. I literally, hey, do me a favor and go back to slide 8, please. Go back to slide 8. He said there's no verifiable details. There are 9. I just have 3 here for spatial reasons, but the term polytarch is used singularly. That's a hopoxogomenon for Luke. Philippi as a meris, that's singular for Luke. And Gallio with proconsul of Achaia is singular for Luke. And by the way, that is a 12-month, that was from 51 to 52. That's a 12-month proconsulship. You will notice that the term polytarch is a localized term that was around in the mid-50s. The term proconsul, he was proconsul of Achaia between 51 and 52. My opponent didn't touch any of this. These are independent Lucanisms that then had to get verified because there were no, forget Josephus, Suetonius, none of these other guys had this either. So that's got to get addressed, because when you said that there's no verifiable information outside of Josephus, that's just not true. It's just not true. I wouldn't choose the identical cast of characters. I don't think you understood the argument. You had hundreds of people to choose from in Europe, and yet we came with the exact same 3 people. You had 8 to 12 people to choose from in terminal window 1. So those 3 people are not coincidental. They are inevitable. You're not going to talk about 9/11 unless you talk about Bush, bin Laden, Manhattan, Twin Towers, Allahu Akbar, whatever. So that argument, I was just very confused. I'm like, maybe he missed that. He missed that part. He also didn't take into account, do me a favor, let's go back to slide 6. He doesn't take into account the fact that Luke never theologizes any of these claimants. Okay. It is Josephus with the crazy numbers. It's Josephus with the supernatural self-designation. It's Josephus who invokes sacred geography. Luke doesn't do any of that. And there was no explanation for why that is. There is a constant assumption from my friend that Luke is borrowing from Josephus, or that Josephus is right in his ordering, for example, of Theudas and Judas. The assumption is that he is right. I'll ask him if there's a third-party mediator that gives a nod to Josephus over and against Luke. Because what I'm saying is, why are we even not? Look, there's a 2 Theudas theory, all the rest of it. My issue is, based on what we're seeing, we already know that Josephus has chronology issues. We know that Josephus contradicts himself. And here's the logical problem that we have here. When Luke says something that overlaps with Josephus, it's evidence of dependency. When Luke contradicts Josephus, for example, calling the Egyptian a Sakari, that also proves dependence on Josephus. That to me seems like we're running into the realm of unfalsifiability at that level, because then how in the world could we falsify the idea? Pattern of errors. I would like to see these patterns of errors without just assuming that Josephus is right. He says, I wouldn't choose identical characters, but then he admitted that he chose the exact same 3 that we talked about. And again, if you're writing about history, this is not like a cafeteria. Like, oh, I don't want to talk about Hitler. Let me talk about this random dude from Bulgaria. Like, that's not how history works. Okay, so it's not about like, oh, I'm going to choose who. No, you deal with the same issue. You might come at it from a different angle, but you're going to deal with the same cast of characters if you're dealing with a very, very specific window in time, especially in geography. I need this dealt with. Why does Luke choose to omit the supernatural framing of these people? If you're saying that we want to make Jesus the star of the show, then proving that these people are false prophets is very, very important to make that claim. Finally, we don't deal with the fact that he says getting information right isn't a sign of earliness. Well, I would agree with you to a degree. The problem is the very things that he got right all go back to the middle of the 1st century. Go back to slide 8, please. If you go to slide 8, you can see that the Polytarchs in Thessalonica, okay, that was around the mid-50s, okay? The Philippi as a district in Maris, again, mid-50s. Gallio was proconsul, 51 to 52. He also uses the term Asiarchs, which you cannot find in antiquity. So again, Luke has nine times where Luke says something. Critical scholarship disagreed with it because they couldn't find it in classical literature. And then we find out, oh, actually, Luke was right. It turns out he was right. So that wasn't dealt with at all. These are not like, and the other thing is, we have to figure out why these are all dated in the mid-50s. So Luke has got the craziest memory of all time. There he is in 93, writing about Gallio, something that happened 40 years earlier, writing about Gallio as proconsul of Achaia, which he only was for 12 months between 51 and 52. He's writing this in 93. Well, no, the Antiquities was published in 93, so maybe like 95, maybe even 100. Okay, so 50, 60 years after the events, Luke guesses from memory that Gallio was proconsul of Achaia for 1 year. I think what's more probable and more parsimonious as a response is the reason that we have these 9 issues that Luke uses that are unique to all of history is because A, Luke was an eyewitness to a lot of this stuff, particularly the Egyptian conversation, and B, Luke had a different source. Luke had a different source than Josephus, and that source was more accurate. So, for example, with Judas, he's like, he's many people, and then many of them were killed, and then many were captured. Luke's like, yeah, he had 400 people. That sounds more like a historian to me than Josephus, who had obvious reasons for why he was writing what he was writing. I'll yield the rest of my time.
Right, that is the last. You pretty much did 10 minutes there, so we're good to go. There's one more section left. It is going to be a 5-minute. What do you call it?
15
closing. 15.
Yeah, we're doing
15-minute cross-sections.
Oh, okay, I thought it was
forth.
Okay, let me adjust that. Let me adjust my clock then. 15 minutes. Closing statements. Is that what it is?
It's cross-ex and then 5-minute closing statement.
Yeah, we're doing 15. Oh. I'm examining him, then he's examining me, then we do 5-minute closing.
I totally flipped out the 15 minute. I had the 5 minutes for later.
Yeah,
okay,
no worries, no worries.
Derek, you have a cross-examination. Yes. You get to ask him questions for 15 minutes. Do you want me to start the clock right now?
Yes.
Clock is on right now.
Awesome. So can you explain why the order Acts 5 presents Theudas and Judas in matches Antiquities 25 without appealing to sheer coincidence, or are you saying common source?
No, I don't think I said it's not coincidence. I think talking about those 3 individuals is inevitable. I also
it's Theudas Judas, not we're not talking about the Egyptian, but the specific.
Yeah, I keep saying all 3, but those two are inevitable. You're going to talk about them. Secondly, Josephus mentions that Judas the Galilean was the originator of the Zealot party.
Mm-hmm.
And Simon, there was a zealot in Jesus's band of followers.
Right.
Simon the Zealot. And historically speaking, it is almost certain, because traditionally in church history, he was from Galilee, which obviously, it's almost certain that Simon knew him. So my point is, you are seeing a correlation between him and Josephus, as if to say that Josephus is the standard. You're assuming that Luke is copying from him,
Yes.
and then saying because Josephus is the standard, Luke's version is inverted. And what I'm saying is there a third-party mediator that says that Josephus is right? Is there another historian that says that this order is correct, or are we just going by Josephus is right, and so because they're flipped, Luke is wrong?
Right. So let me follow up further, because at the end of that rebuttal, you mentioned he had some sources, he had material. There's no doubt to me, I would agree with you, that Luke had access to information because this guy's writing in the early 2nd century. This is my take. There is archaeological evidence. He could be traveling in this area. There's a lot of evidence to support the idea that these ideas are still around. Here's my question, though, because this isn't my time to speak, is how do you address this, what we're looking at right here, specifically, the backwards chronology? With Theudas here in Josephus, he is saying that Theudas dies, right, in 44 CE under Cuspius Fatus. He literally couches it with like a ton of anchored historical information. And then he describes Judas the Galilean's sons up after Theudas, right? So when we look at Luke, that same order is there. The problem is he acts like Theudas was before Judas, which we know was around Quirinius and the taxation and the rebels and all that kind of stuff that took place. So my question is, coming back to you, is how do you address that chronology error?
What I'm saying is that your question assumes that Josephus is an authority that's almost infallible.
He is. No, but not that he's infallible.
And I'm trying to answer you.
Sorry.
From my vantage point, it sounds like you're saying Josephus is the unquestioned standard, and any variance from him is wrong. And what I'm saying is that is an untenable position, considering the fact that Encyclopedia Britannica says that he's got chronology issues. And by the way, this is a chronology issue. And by the way, this is a very famous problem, not for Luke, just in Josephus studies. The order here is mixed. Secondly, Josephus contradicts himself on the Egyptian. In wars, it's 4,000. In antiquities, it's 30,000.
So notice, if he's willing to, my question following up on the Egyptian then would be, if he's willing to change numbers in his own sources, then why can't Luke be copying him and changing the numbers too? It makes no sense.
Why is Luke? Here's the thing. I've shown 9 instances where Luke has things that are unique to him.
Yes.
They're hapax legomenon. There is no other religious document that can say that. None.
Listen, there are many things Josephus said that not only historically and archaeologically have been shown, right? But Josephus himself has been vindicated on many points that historians haven't thought he was right before.
I agree. Right, what I'm saying is that shows me that Josephus is a historian.
Of course.
You should take what he says seriously.
Right.
But Luke also is a historian who should be taken seriously.
So
when you have 9 hapax legomenon, then on what other basis can we say that he's not a historian?
So because he has,
I'll probably ask you later, but
so you're saying because he has unique terms that he uses that no one else uses that have been vindicated specifically on this archaeological point you're pointing out, that at one point skeptics didn't think Luke had accurate information. He's been vindicated. That somehow validates
scholars.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like skeptical scholars.
That's important, though. That's important.
Right. That is important. But my point is, because we found him have some historical verisimilitude vindicated, just like we have with Josephus, you now are like trusting that document to somehow be superior to a document that actually was like the Roman Empire said this is the chief and primary history for this very region. This is the standard historian for that region.
My brother, if I write something and the current political administration says this guy is the standard, would you take that as validation of me?
I would read it and I'd see how exhaustive he is on it.
You'd read it, but would you say, hey, this administration says that he's the man, so he must be the man?
We don't have anyone else who wrote the histories of that region. That's what I'm
trying to explain to you is that Josephus is a guy who expatriated from being a Jew
Mm-hmm.
to now work with the Romans, and he's got to keep himself alive. So the fact that he wrote a history that was then co-signed by the Roman government
Mm-hmm.
doesn't add any sort of credibility to what he has to say. Here's what I have. This man has 30,000 people showing up in Jerusalem. That did not happen. I'm sure you and I agree that did not happen, right?
Right.
So I've got quotes where people are saying that Antiquities is actually more rhetorical than it is factual. Right. And I think that's a perfect example of that.
I think that of Acts.
Say again?
I think that of Acts. That's the thing I think of Acts as well.
The problem is that Josephus is the one with the crazy numbers. Luke is the one with the reserve numbers. Josephus is the one that has theological sacred space. Luke doesn't mention it with those three. Josephus is the one that has the supernatural self-designation. Luke doesn't mention that. And he has every reason to, and he doesn't. So that tells me Luke is operating from a different source. So that's evidence that he's operating from a different source. He's got hapax legomena that are, in other words, things that are only unique to him that you will not find anywhere else. And he also has, when you're talking about the same issues, he also has completely different conclusions as well as designations. So that's why.
Okay, so it sounds like Josephus is propaganda, and I would say Acts is propaganda, but I would trust someone who has much more historical information couching their content. You just said that he had another source. Do you have that source? Do you have any way to vindicate the source that Luke has?
I have as much. Well, first of all, what I said was that Luke had two sources. One was that he was an eyewitness, which is why he gets very specific things like Asiarchs correct. And they're not only regional terms, bro, but they're also time-specific terms. Like the proconsulship was only 12 months. Okay? So I'm going to ask you how he gets that one right from 50, 60 years prior.
Easy.
But
I mean, he lived in the region. Yeah. But we'll
from 50 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely.
He lived in Thessalonica?
Josephus
he lived in Thessalonica between 51 and 52?
Well, let me ask you this. How did Josephus get the content about Judas the Galilean in 6 BC that's over almost 100 years ago? How did he get this information?
I don't believe that Josephus's dates are canonical, bro, but you do. Right. Even though you admit.
No.
Okay, so they're not canonical.
No,
okay.
what I'm saying is I treat Josephus as critical as I would Acts. You don't with Acts. You will with Josephus. Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
No, you just told me you assume that Josephus was a standard, and contradicting him would be to contradict history.
I've got a few minutes left, and I think it's worth asking some questions. We're having fun going back and forth, but we do need to keep it on the questions here.
And extend him if he needs it. Go ahead.
No, you guys are fine.
No, you're fine. So let me ask you this then. Let's go to the specific question of Mark 13. Where do you think Luke got the extra information and the detail that he adds to Jesus's prophecy in Mark 13?
Yeah, I think that's a major problem for you guys because you're calling an update. It's not an update. It's a translation.
Where did he get that additional information, though?
It's not additional information. I'm trying to.
So if I show you a parallel side by side, will you?
I'm trying to answer you. I promise.
But you didn't answer. You said it's not.
Wait. Let's do this, moderator. If he is not satisfied with my answer, we're going to extend the cross-ex. Okay.
All right. Well, it depends, though. But yeah, go ahead.
Fair. Okay. So what I'm saying is that when he says Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you'll know its desolation is near. That's not an update. That's a translation for a Gentile audience. Secondly, I don't know if you've read any C.H. Dodd, but Dodd shows very clearly that the language in Acts for siege warfare is actually closer lexically to the siege in Babylon, the Babylonian exile, than Antiquities. That's just a fact. So what happens is Mark is narrated by Peter, Jewish audience. Matthew, obviously Jewish audience. Luke is not a Jewish audience, so they don't understand the background of the abomination of desolation. They don't have the history of Antiochus Epiphanes and all the rest of it, where Antiochus, during the Seleucid Empire, went in there, sacrificed pigs, abominated the temple, whole 9 yards. They don't have that background. So Luke just translates it to them.
I want to give Derek some time to ask some questions.
There's
4.5 minutes left.
So to be fair here, Vinny, is that you're going on for two minutes at a time, 1 minute at a time, like really long answers here. That's why I was pushing in because my time's running out, and I don't mean to be rude, but I mean, I could share my screen and show you side by side additional chunks of material that is not even in Mark in Luke.
Did
in
I
this
did
very
I
passage.
explain that to you? I said that
No,
is closer to the Babylonian
you said it was a
exile than antiquities.
translation. You said it was a translation.
The term Jerusalem, but surrounded by armies, is a translation of the abomination of desolation.
What about the Luke 19 passage that talks about the ramparts? That is a specific wooden wall that would encircle the city that Rome actually did in 70 AD. Wouldn't that be at least evidence that you would think
The Babylonian exile
let me
had
finish
the.
my question.
Hold on, let Derek finish.
Yeah. Because I'm trying to get.
You'll get your chance to have your questions. So,
like you think this is a real prophecy, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely a real prophecy.
Okay, so if it's absolutely a real prophecy, then Luke should get that detail precise, and that is wooden ramparts, just like Josephus describes, right?
No, he does. What he needs to describe is, because what Jesus is trying to do is warn people to leave, which actually happened when Gallus left and the Christians fled. He's warning people to leave. So he's saying, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, get out of Dodge. And by the way, if you look at all the other synoptic parallels to that passage, all the instructions are the same. Run, flee, etc.
Right. You're not
answering
your
filibustering, but we got your point there. We got you.
Yeah, the point I'm making is he literally says that ramparts, right, literal wall of wooden wall, will be built in Luke 19 that will surround the city. That's exactly what happened in 70 AD. You would think that's a fulfillment of prophecy. That is different from what Mark describes as the abomination that makes desolate. That is not exclusively specific language. And what I'm saying is, and we would just disagree at the end of the day, is that I look at that and that's awareness that the author knows. You think
is that a
that's
question?
So I'm asking you, do you not think that could be that he's aware of the Roman-Jewish war already?
Well, as I said, Dodd has made this very clear that there are more lexical parallels to the Babylonian exile and the siege warfare of the Babylonians than in antiquities. You didn't touch that at all.
Why didn't Mark do that?
Because Mark and Matthew are writing to a Jewish audience. As a matter of fact, if you look at Matthew actually says this. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it does, and then he says, let the reader understand. Now, so even to a Jewish audience, he's telling them, you're going to need to do some work here. So
how do you know that Mark's writing to a Jewish audience? Because all the scholars I read say it's actually writing to a Gentile audience. Matthew's writing to a Jewish.
No, I don't. What scholar says that? I've got Carson Piper. I've got 4 guys here that's saying Mark is writing to a Jewish audience. Right.
I would say Adela Yarbrough Collins, who wrote the Hermeneia commentary, would argue this, and that's like the chief major commentary many people use. Several academics that actually highlight this. I could list dozens of academics who think that.
We both can list. We could both list that. What I'm saying is, there's no question that Luke is writing to a Jewish audience. I mean, to a Gentile audience, right?
I would agree.
And Matthew makes it clear that this is difficult. He says, when you see the abomination, let the reader understand. So this is a Jewish audience that knows their Bible, and even they would have. So Luke is like, I'm just going to translate this for y'all, because they don't have the background that the folks in Matthew have.
Yeah.
So all right,
Derek, you got 1 minute and a half left, Derek. So keep asking questions.
All right. Last question I will ask, and we have very little time here. Can you think of a more ideal place in Acts to put a final farewell speech if the author wanted to foreshadow Paul's death?
Yes.
Where?
Yes. Right at 28, when he's about to die. You haven't talked to Nero. He stares down the beast.
So you want him to include additional
wonderful flurry.
You would want him to include additional work that the author did not write, which we cannot know why he did.
You asked me if I could conceive of a better ending of Acts, right?
No. In the book of Acts,
in
Acts that he has written right now, where would be a better location for him to insert that? The farewell speech in Acts.
You're talking about when he tells the Macedonians he's never going to see him again?
When he's speaking from Miletus, yes.
Yeah, I don't. That's not a very significant speech to me. I don't interpret that speech as some big long goodbye speech. Paul thought that he was going to go to Spain. That's very, very clear. So he just knew he was never going to see those guys again, because he's like, I've got no reason to go back there. He didn't even want to go hang out with the Romans. Paul was, man, I'm out of here. So he was not.
Do you want one more question to end it on, or are you done? Are you good, Derek?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
I'm going to start off 15 more minutes for the exact opposite now. We just set my time to 15, and you are on the clock. Go ahead, Vinny. The floor is yours to ask Derek questions.
Derek, who mentions Jerusalem more than anybody in the Gospels?
In the Gospels? Specifically, which Gospel?
All Gospels. between the four. Who mentions Jerusalem the most?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Luke.
Okay.
Luke. Twice as much as Matthew, almost 3 times as much as Mark, almost twice as much as John. Do you know how many times that Jerusalem is mentioned in Acts?
How many?
59.
Gotcha.
So we've got this Egyptian, right?
Mm-hmm.
According to Josephus, where does he post up?
Where does the Egyptian post up? At the Mount of Olives.
Where does he man the Mount of Olives? Is the Mount of Olives important to Luke?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. But there are many prophets that
who mentions the Mount of Olives more than anybody in the New Testament?
There were many prophets that saw Jerusalem as a significant location.
Who mentioned the Mount of Olives more than anybody in the New Testament?
Who mentioned the Mount of Olives more than anybody, like you just asked me?
Mm-hmm.
Luke.
Okay. So Luke mentions Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives, and you said that he's trying to make Jesus a star, correct?
He's trying to make Jesus what?
Jesus is the star of Acts, you said.
In Luke. Jesus is the star in Luke. Yeah, his gospel. I mean, obviously Christians are producing the gospel. They're pushing the gospel of Christ.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
But Jesus is the star in Luke. Yes.
Okay. So
I just got a call too, by the way.
Isn't it true literally from the Mount of Olives? Isn't it true that literally from the Mount of Olives, Jesus said that false prophets were going to come in his name?
Yes, it is. And there were many prophets beyond the ones listed in Josephus, which would make sense why Luke would have additional names. But yeah,
that's fine. That's fine.
And by the way, please allow me to also elaborate, because you went on sometimes for minutes at a time.
Yeah, no. If I ask you,
I'm just saying when you're doing all that, you know what I mean. I'm just saying.
I'm saying like I got you.
Okay.
Explain to me, the Egyptian is a messianic claim.
I'm hearing something like a ring.
So I'm hearing like a beep too. It's not me.
You're hearing that beep right now?
Yeah, it's going to be.
Oh my God, I'm trying to get rid of it.
Okay,
give me some of my time.
I thought you were. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No. Okay, so explain to me why Luke does not talk about the fact that the Egyptian posts up from the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem in literally the exact place where Jesus prophesied that false prophets were going to come. He doesn't exploit that. Explain to me why.
Why doesn't Luke give that narration?
Why doesn't he exploit that? Yeah.
For the Egyptian. And he only gives one sentence. The Egyptian gets one sentence and he conflates 3 things into one thing.
Well, I'm asking you a very specific question. We agree that Luke mentions Jerusalem more than any New Testament writer, and he also mentions the Mount of Olives. Okay. The Egyptian was going to attack Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. Luke mentions it not at all. How come?
Why doesn't he mention that he was going to attack the Mount of Olives, or go on the Mount of Olives and try to attack?
He doesn't mention his prophetic claimants. He doesn't mention the Mount of Olives, and he doesn't mention Jerusalem. Why?
Right. It's a Roman soldier who's asking Paul, "Are you the Egyptian who led 4,000 Sicarii into the desert?" He conflates 3 things Josephus elaborates in great depth about. So
can you explain to me why he would not mention Jerusalem in the Mount of Olives?
It's an argument from silence, what you're asking, because if you go to Judas...
No, it's a methodological question.
Let me finish. So Judas the Galilean also was in Jerusalem, and he was trying to cleanse the temple, just like we see with Jesus, right? Here around the taxation of Quirinius. So you're asking a question that the same parallelomania you would accuse me of, trying to inflate the Egyptian with Jesus here and the Jerusalem temple. All I'm saying is he doesn't narrate it. He doesn't narrate it and doesn't give us any of the historical.
We agree that he doesn't narrate it.
Right.
What I'm asking you is, he is writing for apologetic and theological reasons.
Right.
And there is a bunch to exploit with the Mount of Olives and attacking Jerusalem.
How do you know that author wanted to do that?
The specific question I'm asking you is, considering Luke's consistent highlighting of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives, why does he not exploit it? That is my question.
I don't know. And you don't either.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, you don't either.
Thank you. So then the most parsimonious answer then would be that they didn't have the same source, right?
I would disagree. I think he's conflating it into one sentence.
How is it?
He conflates the primary things in Josephus. You have the Egyptian, you have the Sicarii, which are completely different bands. They were not following the Egyptian. Just reading that, they're a whole nother group that he couches. And by the way, the Sicarii are mentioned 19 different times in a massive volume.
All right, Derek, you got to let him ask the questions, though. Okay. You kind of,
it's okay.
But I'm trying to make a point. There's
you're good. That's why I'm here.
But you're okay. So you don't know why Luke, who has every reason to exploit Mount of Olives and Jerusalem, completely leaves it out. You don't know why.
It's not necessary to his story.
Okay, it's not necessary to a
No,
story. Okay,
I don't think it's
did you? Hey, do me a favor. Give me slide 9 again.
And real quick, if I may elaborate on that last question that you asked me, why doesn't he narrate Judas's cleansing of the temple, since Jerusalem's so serious and important?
Because they're not using the same source.
So
that's literally
You hold on, Derek. You're not. It's not you're asking questions right now.
That's okay. It's a valid question, but that's why.
I'll let it happen
That's
then.
why. Go to slide 6. When he, I just want to tell everybody again. There's a pattern here. Josephus is constantly talking about the theology of these people, and he's constantly invoking sacred space, and Luke is constantly not doing it. This guy tried to cleanse the temple. Luke could completely exploit that. He never does. The most parsimonious answer to that, in my view, is that he's using a different source. Can you go to slide 9 real quick? In this slide, Paul tells the Romans that not only is the gospel reached Rome, this is in 57 or 60 to 62, not only the gospel has reached Rome, but it's so powerful that the entire world is talking about them. Do you agree with that? Is that what you're seeing there in front of you?
What is the question?
The gospel by the year 60 to 62 had already penetrated Rome, so much so that the whole world was talking about it.
In Acts,
Colossians 1.
Okay, you're talking about in Paul's letters, right?
Yep.
Yeah, because I'd say they both contradict. If you're going into
I'm asking you a specific question, though.
Yeah.
I'm asking you a very specific question.
Uh-huh.
Romans 1:8, your faith is being proclaimed throughout the world. That's in the year 57.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't know what year Romans was for sure written, but I would just agree with you for the sake of argument.
It's an undisputed letter of Paul, right?
Yeah, but
so
we
it
don't
had to
know
be by 64.
we don't know the exact date, is all I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Here we go. At the end of Romans, he says, I no longer have any work in these regions. I don't have any room for work in these regions. I hope to see you in passing, though, as I go to Spain. So by the year 57, and finally, we've got Philippians, where he says the whole Praetorian Guard has heard the gospel. And then he says the converts in Caesar's household send their greetings. Right. So the gospel has already penetrated not only Rome by 57, but Caesar's actual household. Is that what the texts are saying in front of you?
Caesar's household, there are scholarly disputes of what is meant by Caesar's household, but for the sake of this debate, and there's no reason to get into these weeds, I'll just grant, yeah, sure, why not? There are people in Caesar's household that are buying into the story of the gospel. Fine. Okay,
great. And this is happening all over the world, according to the text.
The known Roman world that Paul is journeying to according to the letters, sure.
Right, because he uses oikomene, right, instead of cosmos, right?
Like Luke's known for...
The word he used in Colossians was oikomene, which is the entire Roman world, not the world.
Right, right. I think we would agree.
Right. So we've got about 50 to 60 years of the gospel, Rome being an oversight for Paul. That's how converted Rome is. So explain to me, and also in the 90s, we already have, Rome is like a mega church, mega bishopric. Explain to me why Luke ends Acts in such a anticlimactic fashion if the entire point is to talk about the gospel penetrating Rome when we already have examples of victorious gospel victories in Rome.
So you're talking about the letters, which is different from Luke Acts, and Luke Acts is climatic. You say anticlimactic. We disagree on the last words, the very last word of the gospel. It has gone forth unhindered. If he's getting decapitated, this is where it gets into the martyrdom stuff that I was trying to bring up, that if he gets decapitated by Nero, that would mean Nero, Romans saw him as guilty. Romans are not guilty. In every case that Christians get arrested throughout the narrative, Romans save the day. Jews
Can you
are
answer
the
my
antagonists.
question, though?
I am. That's my point.
Can you say my question back to me? Because I don't think you understand my question.
You said that it's gone conquering throughout the Roman world, and you asked me why does Luke end anticlimactic? I'm answering your point.
What I'm saying is there's already a mega church in Rome when Luke is writing. Rome is an afterthought in the early church.
Where in Acts does it say there's a mega church already in Rome? In Acts, not in his letters.
We're talking about history, though. You're saying that he wrote it in the 90s, right?
I'm saying that Luke Acts wrote it past the 90s. Yes.
Right. So by that time, we have a long-established bishopric in Rome. So why does he need to talk about the gospel penetrating Rome when that's old news already?
because he's theologizing the story of the message that's gone forward from Jerusalem to Rome, which he, I believe, is in Ephesus writing this material, but that's not for this debate. And that is because at this time, Rome is the hub that he is ultimately saying where the church is established. That's
where
why
is the hunger for that message?
They're in Rome. By the time he's writing, there's an established megachurch in this area, in Rome. The gospel has gone forth unhindered. He has no interest in narrating the death of Paul, the death of Peter. And the reasons is,
why does he have an interest in narrating the death of Stephen?
Because they were killed by Jews. And guess what? Both Paul and Peter were killed by Romans. In the tradition of Christianity, Romans.
Who was James killed by?
James was killed by Jews.
Is James the Just mentioned in the book of Acts?
Is James the Just mentioned? You're talking about the one from Josephus that got killed?
Uh-huh.
Because there's different Jameses that are floating around.
Right. There's James, the son of Zebedee, who he mentions as being killed.
Right.
But then there's James the Just, who presided over the Acts 15 council, right?
Right.
Who was killed by Jews, right?
Right.
And then people got so angry that they went to Albinus and got Ananus demoted, right?
Mm-hmm. That's in Josephus.
That sounds... Right. So he was killed by a Jew, and he was a prominent member in the church. Why that happened in 62? Right. Why is his death not mentioned?
Again, he had no interest in mentioning James. He mentioned Stephen. He mentioned
James.
Right, but he doesn't mention his martyrdom. He didn't look. People don't have to write everything that ever happened. You know how much stuff Josephus wrote about and skips over because it doesn't serve his mention.
Who is more important to the church?
Hold on. This is answering your question. I deserve this time to elaborate here because I'm taking shot after shot, and I'm happy to do it.
Go ahead.
I do think this is important because Josephus wrote about many things in his histories, skipping 3-4 years of leaders. They're significant when you read them from other historians, but Josephus had no interest. It did not serve his purpose. We have to read what we have. And I'm assessing the data and looking at it going, well, isn't it interesting that the martyrdoms we do have happen by Jews in the narrative? Name one Roman martyrdom killed by Romans in Luke Acts.
1 minute left, Derek. Land your plane. Go ahead.
Question?
Yeah, go ahead.
James the Just is the leader of the Jerusalem church. He's the one that issues the final Sharia in Acts 15. He's a very important figure. We are told about the death of Stephen, who's just a deacon, and we're told of the death of Zebedee in one sentence. Mm-hmm. This guy is a seminal leader in the church, and he got killed by Jews who are the bad guys, and Albinus was the good guy because he demoted Ananus. So that's perfect for Luke. So why doesn't he include that one?
I don't know why he doesn't include it. But an argument from silence.
Again, I would say the most parsimonious answer.
Just to finish my point on saying why I don't know is that arguments.
Derek, you'll have time to elaborate on that after this, but let him finish. He got 20 seconds left. Let him ask his last question.
No. I want you to have the last word. I will say that this is not this is not about an argument from silence. This is about a methodological divergence. So if Tom Brady throws 100 yards a game, right, every single game, and then one game he doesn't, right, we're going to say what happened, right? So that's not an argument from silence. That's about methodology. Somebody mentions Jerusalem a million times, Mount of Olives a million times, and then doesn't mention it here. It's a methodological question. So I'll leave it with you. Why is James the Just important leader in the church? Mm-hmm. Romans are good guys, Jews are bad guys, perfect template. Why is his death not mentioned?
I don't know, and you don't either,
Okay.
All right. So that brings us to the last 5-minute closing before we do the Q&A. Thank you for everyone who dropped the super chat so far. We got some very good questions for both people so far. Awesome. So I want to encourage people to drop those in there so we can continue to have a good Q&A. Every no matter how much you donate, $1, $10, they'll all be asked. So yeah, the last 5 minutes, Derek, you are up, and let's finish this off.
Well, okay. Let me get the full screen. Here we go. Okay. Look, I went into this. This is my first formal debate I've ever done. I want to thank Vinny. I really do appreciate him for being not only an opponent that was willing to come and challenge, but also a respectful person. We are doing what we typically do, but I do appreciate him for doing that. So I want to say that up front. I would like to say this in a debate setting, as Steve Mason said to me earlier today and yesterday, he's not a fan of debates. And I said, why is that, Steve? And he said, because you're first of all under pressure and you're trying to compete and you're sharpening iron, iron sharpens iron. But this specific topic of Josephus as a source for Luke, I may not be the torchbearer that might convince you, but if I can at least nudge you into reading his actual works and consider what he actually argues there are so many overlaps and coincidences that you'd have to argue for, that you have to say, well, Luke had independent knowledge. Now we have different issues. One contradicts the other. And when you read Josephus and you see how often Josephian language, this is something that Steve Mason highlights, in his narratives, he's mentioned the Sicarii 19 times. He mentions, for example, we didn't even get into the Pharisees as the most precise heresies school, and how literally Luke Acts does the same thing in his narrative as well. We have to argue all of these are just coincidental, independent historians coming to the same data. I didn't have time in this debate to get into all the contradictions between Luke Acts, the companion of Paul, who's supposedly right there with him, and Paul's own letters. That's a whole nother discussion. But I would like to say there are a lot of historical blunders, both in Josephus and Luke Acts. I'm not an apologist for Josephus. I know it seems like I'm thinking that Josephus is a better authority for the source of what Luke would borrow from, because when you read it, it's couched in so much more historical material. The language, all of it is Josephus. Scholars at one point read Josephus like an encyclopedia. They looked at it like, oh, he just is collecting information. Boom, you can extract it like it, and that's just facts. And then they now realize Josephus is an author with an agenda, the same way Luke Acts is. And he's trying to give you a theological painted story of the church. I think that the arguments that I brought up pertaining to why there's no mention of the martyrdom of Paul and Peter are something worthy of investigating, especially when the top apologist online, like Michael Jones, says it's the most devastating evidence for the early date. And I think we have a really good argument we can make on why that martyrdom wasn't mentioned in light of the fact of Luke Acts' agenda with Rome, with Jews and such. And I think it could be spelled out even more. This all was done in 2 days. This all was come together in 2 days. Me just reaching a Glover, Daniel B. Glover, coming up with this. So at the end of the day, there's so much commonality between these two. Proving anything, you can't do that historically. You can make a probable case. And I think Theudas, Judas backwards, the common thing that gets brought up is that Theudas, there's another Theudas, there's different ideas. I'm sure Vinny knows about this, but I would suggest that everyone go read Josephus, see what he does, because if this is the same Judas or Theudas, you want to believe that Luke Acts had the correct chronology. He mentions it like this, a small little glimpse, boom. And it only flowers his historiography that he's trying to paint about the church. It's a theological historiography. And when you read Acts, or not Acts, but Josephus, you get way more information. It's couched in so much more historical vetting compared to what Luke Acts is up to. Like, for example, the narration in Luke, the birth, you don't even need to bring in Quirinius. He doesn't need to be there. Why is Lysanias even mentioned in Luke 3:1? He gets one name drop, Lysanias, Tetrarch of Abilene. That's it. Go read Josephus. You will find out. And this is not the medium to give you everything, because Josephus has so much more to say. So I ask everybody in my closing to not only be respectful to Vinny, because a lot of tribalism happens online, but to consider both his arguments and mine, and maybe it'll help sharpen both of our views to coming to a stronger conclusion. That's what I like to think of debates as. I'd like to conclude my final point in saying I encourage debates to be like that instead of being antagonistic and trying to smear other people. If we can create that kind of environment, that's how I'd like to end my closing. Then we'd be in a better place on learning and maybe not treating each other so badly. So I hope that the case that I've brought forward at least whet your appetite. It's too big for this debate. I couldn't bring up all sorts of arguments that are there. I just went with a few of the chief ones. And thank you for your time. Thank you for the time you let me come on here. Appreciate it.
All right, that was a good closing. And you have 5 minutes now, Vinny, for your closing. I'll give you the full floor. The floor is yours.
Cool. Can you put the clock on the side? I want to echo what Homeboy said. People challenge me to debates a lot, and as you guys can see, I like to get down like anybody else. But it's always about ego and all the other stuff. And I found in Derek somebody a kindred spirit, ever curious and brilliant, and thinks very quickly on his feet. Damn it, too quickly. Okay. All right. So what do we have? What do we have? Well, here's what we have. We have. We didn't mention the death of Paul because that would mean that Paul was guilty. I don't think that's a very powerful argument. Jesus got crucified. That doesn't mean that Jesus was guilty. Stephen got stoned. That doesn't mean that Stephen was guilty. My opponent has admitted this in other videos. The second century church was obsessed with martyrdom. My friend about 2 weeks ago shot a video when he was talking about the suicide by cop death porn stuff that happened in the second century. So his argument for why we don't see the martyrdom of Paul, I'm sorry, just is not consistent. Furthermore, I didn't even get to touch on this, but the fact that none of the New Testament authors mention the destruction of that Jerusalem was actually destroyed is extremely curious. Paul mentions a prophecy of Agabus, and then he says, no, not Paul, Luke. He says this was fulfilled during the reign of Claudius. So the New Testament authors have no problem with saying ex eventu prophecies. They talked about Agabus. They talked about Jesus did self-fulfilling prophecies when he fulfilled Zechariah 9 and the triumphal entry, all the rest of it. The New Testament has no problem with Jesus purposely fulfilling a prophecy, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not a single person talks about the destruction of the Jerusalem, not one. There's no explanation for that. You also saw that there is no explanation for why the martyrdom of James the Just is completely ignored. Josephus talked about the martyrdom of James the Just. You guys don't know this, but Annas, who was the high priest at the time, was the son of the high priest that Jesus was brought to for his trial before he went to Caiaphas. So that means that Annas, the one that had James killed, would have been in the room when that happened. There's a lot there that Luke could have exploited. Never even mentions it. Why? James was killed in 62. This book was written in 60. There's a reason that all of the historical anomalies are from 51 and 52. Being the proconsul of Achaia, there is no other source in the world ever that has Gallio as a proconsul of Achaia other than Luke. This is not just like a guess. This man is a legit credentialed historian. Does he have an agenda? Yes, every historian has an agenda, dear listener. But there's just way too many unanswered questions here. He sets it up, hey, we're trying to present the Romans as good guys and the Jews as bad guys. Great. Then you have to talk about the martyrdom of James, but he doesn't. And again, guys, James is the central guy in the book of Acts for the Jerusalem church. That's just a fact. It's just a fact. He never deals with that. What he says is, I don't know. We talked about the conversations with Pilate, the conversations with Agrippa. We don't believe that you don't believe those conversations happened. So why didn't he create a conversation with Nero where he stands up defiantly? No answer. He doesn't know. There's a lot of I don't knows, and I don't knows don't necessarily mean you're wrong. But what it does mean is that means that your thesis needs some work. I think the most parsimonious answer, the answer with the least variables, is very simple. Luke had an independent source. And by the way, I didn't get to talk about this, but I'm sure my brother believes in this. There's a document called Q that nobody has, that everybody believes existed somewhere, because that's how we got the synoptics, right? So I'm sure Derek believes in the Q document. So calling this Q2 is not a problem for us. I know I got 30 seconds left. Guys, Luke Acts was written in the 60s. The internal evidence is there. The specific hypoxagomenon that Luke uses are first century, mid-first century names, titles, etc. What I'll leave you with is, if the book of Acts is worth me and Derek debating, maybe you should crack it open and read it alongside Josephus. My time's done.
All right, that is it for the timer. We're done with timers now. Now we're just going to have is it open? We're not doing an open discussion.
No, Q&A.
No, there's no
Q&A.
back and forth open discussion at all.
No. We did. That was kind of our cross-examination. What we would like to do, and I think as long as we're all in agreement here, Vinny, for time's sake, we want to probably limit our answers to the Q&A to 2 to 3 minutes, so that we're being fair with time. And if you really want to elaborate on something, if I want to elaborate on something, that way we can get through them all, because I imagine we have plenty to do.
I do have, before we would start, I just have I have a question myself for Vinny. One of the things I was confused about was the idea that the gospel was like spreading throughout the entire world. So like this doesn't need to be dealt with. But like my confusion is when Pliny the Younger's writing to Trajan in 117, he's talking about Christians as if he's just heard of them for the first time. He has no idea who these people are. They're like nobody. He has never heard of them yet. And it looks like he's introducing who Christians are to Trajan. Trajan would have been a consul during the Flavian period, so he's been in the government for a long time. And also, you have like Tacitus in 120 calling Jesus Christus and getting his name wrong. It just seems the evidence, and then the archaeological evidence suggests Christianity was not widespread until the 4th century. That it's really small minority. And I'm just wondering what you mean by it spread throughout the entire world and everyone knew about it.
I don't think that the fact that elites don't know something about a movement means anything. I think one of the most self-aware moments I've ever seen in my life was President Obama. He was done, and he was saying that he got really good at the presidency in the last 2 years. But then the irony is now you're leaving. And he said, but what I realized is that it was good that I left. And he said, my misreading of the Trump movement indicates that I had lost touch. And I think that that's a very, very important thing to think about. We've got CNN, we've got computers, we've got analysts, and still a guy as intelligent as that completely misread how large the movement was. So when I look at, 1st century, 2nd century Rome, there's no CNN, there's a whole bunch of movements that happen right under your nose, and you don't find out till it's too late. So that's how I'd explain that.
Thanks. Right. That was your Q&A question.
Yeah, that was my question. That was good.
He earned it for modding us. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Tracy Fenstar.
I had that prepped up because I was certain that you were going there. Then Gnostic informant came and sideswiped me.
I had a bunch prepped up for you, and you did different things too. So that's how debates work. You know what I mean?
The first question,
like, we got to do a 20-minute opening, bro.
Yeah. No, I think we hashed this out pretty well. Yeah. The first question from Tracy. Thank you for the 5. This is for Derek actually. Derek, how do you know that Josephus didn't borrow from Luke?
Great question. I prepared for that one, and I've got my notes. So here's what happened before the debate, real quick. If you don't mind, Vinny, just giving me 30 seconds here. When you do this, let me just warn people for your first debate ever, if you decide to do this, don't start 4 days before a debate trying to exhaust. There is so much in this topic. I know Vinny knows what I'm talking about after digging in. You really need to go do the deep research. So here's the thing. How do we know Josephus didn't borrow from Luke? 5 reasons. First, the material is at home in Josephus. Every shared item serves his 20-volume narrative. In Luke, they're passing one-off mentions. Second, the information degrades from Josephus to Luke, not the other way around. Now, this is according to Steve Mason. Josephus has detailed contextualized accounts. Luke has simplified, I would say, and Steve Mason says, error-filled summaries, and we didn't get into Quirinius and the
give an example at all?
Just Quirinius, if you wanted to give an example of a worldwide census under Augustus, when Josephus describes it as a serious census, because what happened when Judas the Galilean came in and he caused such problems, so the Herods were no longer in control. He sent Roman officials to come now govern the region, which caused problems, which caused Judas the Galilean to come in. He's trying to, get them out from underneath the control, which is why they're a violent movement. And so he gives he uses this word for all the Roman world. And Josephus says, no, it was the region of Syria that was being taxed. And that's why this guy, Judas the Galilean, is coming in. So this historical issue also led to why Jesus is now going to Bethlehem instead of Nazareth. There's a whole lot of theology into this behind why critical scholars would say that. So real quick, I don't want to take too much time. I said I wouldn't. So I think it's important to answer this question, though, is that sources get messier when copied, not cleaner. Third, Josephus' distinctive vocabulary shows up in Luke with the hieresis, the schools for Jewish schools between the Essenes, Pharisees, and Sadducees. The word Sakari, the word threskia. These are Josephine fingerprints. None of Luke's distinctive language shows up in Josephus. Fourth, Josephus is an elite historian writing for a Roman court. He had access to archives, eyewitnesses, and imperial connections. The idea that he consulted an anonymous Christian text is historically absurd. And fifth, no scholar who has actually examined the evidence has ever proposed it. Steve Mason told me when they first made this argument in 1870 something, from that point to today, there's never been a scholar who's ever proposed this idea that Josephus borrowed from an anonymous Christian text called Luke. So those are 5 points.
And I mean, Vinny, do you want to give an answer why you think it's the vice versa, or no?
He deserves it.
I don't really believe that Josephus borrowed from Luke. I just think that even in the response, there's the assumption that Josephus is like some sort of canonical standard. So that when Luke contradicts Josephus, it's proof of borrowing, and when Luke overlaps with Josephus, it's proof of borrowing. That seems to me like an unfalsifiable heuristic to me. But that's all I'll say. But I don't think that there's any evidence that Josephus borrowed from Luke. I think that Luke was too precise for Josephus's likings.
Okay, that's good. That was a great question, Tracy. Thank you for that one. Bach and Pan, Danny Biss, thank you for the 5. A good friend of the channel here. If James was killed in 62 and Paul had a hand in it, could it be that Paul couldn't have died before 66? Do you think he made it to Spain? Great stuff.
Vinny, you want to start?
I'm assuming that's a me question.
I think so.
I'm assuming
it might be for Derek, though.
We can both. I got something to say about the last part, but feel free to start, Vinny.
Do I think he made it to Spain? I actually want to hear what Derek says about that.
I knew you would.
James was killed in 62. I don't think Paul had a hand in it because by that time, Paul is already writing, right? Like Colossians is 57. 1 Thessalonians, Bart Ehrman says is 57, 58. So he's already writing Christian theology, deep Christian theology, the Carmen Christian, Philippians 2. So I don't think that Paul had any hand whatsoever in the death of James. We know what happened. Ananus, when in the transition, when Albinus was coming down, there was that little gap in leadership. He took that time to stone James the Just. When Albinus arrived, not the Christians, the Jewish populace made a beeline to Albinus, complained, and got Ananus demoted. Crazy story. So no, it was Ananus all the way through. It was the guy who killed Jesus. His son killed Jesus's brother. And again, we're told that Luke didn't exploit this at all. Just completely ignored it. Okay.
Yeah, and I would say this, there are traditions in the early Christian church where Paul didn't get killed by Nero, and he did make it to Spain. So that's worth noting. And I think if anyone's interested, you then might ask yourself, well, he obviously became prisoner in Rome. I imagine this hints at the fact that he is killed. My assumption here on thinking this, because I think he hints at that with the farewell speech and the fact that he goes to Jerusalem, then gets arrested and such in Acts. But again, to the Spain part, I would just like to answer that and simply say, because I agree with your assessment of Josephus, is that there are traditions where he made it to Spain and did not get killed under Nero.
Well said. I think that's it for that one. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yep. Tracy, thank you for the 2. Please tell us why Derek is parallelomania. That's for you, Vinny. And I guess it's for why do you think he's parallelomania versus a legitimate parallel?
I don't think that he has parallelomania. I think Steve Mason has parallelomania.
Yeah, well, explain why you think that.
That's why we went through the drill with Terminal Window 2 when you've got Hitler, Stalin, and then we've got Winston Churchill. When you're dealing with a specific window, there are certain people that are not coincidental. There are certain people that are inevitable. If you were dealing with a 9/11 window, you're going to talk about bin Laden. You're going to talk about Manhattan. You're going to talk about the Twin Towers. You're going to talk about Bush. You might even use the term Allahu Akbar. If 2 people are writing about 9/11 and all those similarities are there, it would be ridiculous to say, oh, this means that they're literally dependent on each other. So what happens is, if you're talking about a major situation in a small period of time, then you can only talk about a certain group of people. And that's why I'm saying there's parallelomania. You see this with the Egyptian. For anyone to say that the Egyptian is an example of Josephine borrowing is very clearly suffering from parallelomania. There are almost no parallels between the two.
Okay, good answer. Derek, any defense on why you think it's not parallelomania?
Yeah, I think that when you are dealing with historical settings like that, I imagine historians even today who might be talking about 9/11 do not name every single individual the same. Even big names, they might name a different character. They might have a different agenda. And I think that it kind of tars this term, tars people, and a lot of people have coined the name parallelophobia because a lot of people are afraid of looking at parallels. But again, that's just throwing names at each other. My suggestion would be read Steve Mason carefully. Go read Josephus for yourself and see who seems to be carrying this information. Because if, for example, you're finding the same characters, the same language, and same Latin loanwords, and he's writing in Rome and things like that. And I mean, it's the coincidences I came up with were like 36 before this debate. We would have to go, well, just total coincidence. I just think it's an unfair assessment with someone like Steve Mason, who is hyper careful compared to a lot of scholars that I do know who take really just stretch type of comparisons. And so I would request someone to read Josephus' work.
Can I talk about the Egyptian at some point?
Sure. But one comment too is just
go ahead right now.
Feel free to hear. I have a video coming out, and I didn't want to launch it because I didn't want to give you any fodder. I was trying to hide my secrets from you, Vinny. But listen, it launched this morning, so I decided to launch my Wes Huff video instead. My editor got this 3-hour video where it's actually showing Steve Mason in a much more exhaustive manner than I can even possibly begin to do here in this debate format. So stay tuned. Maybe you'll check it out and comment down below, and you know what I mean?
What do you think about the Egyptian, man?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're to believe is that Luke is sitting down with the Antiquities. Okay. Josephus has this wonderful story, 30,000 people. Luke says, I want to cut that down by 26,000, not 25,000, not 10,000, 26,000. I'm going to cut that number down by 26,000. Okay. The Egyptian went to Jerusalem by way of the Mount of Olives. We already know Jesus in Acts, he ascends to heaven from the Mount of Olives, and he's going to return from the Mount of Olives. The same Mount of Olives where he preached that false Christs were coming in his name. Mm-hmm. The Egyptian shows up, and he's going from the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem. Luke doesn't mention it. Luke says, you led them into the wilderness. Now, my friend, my very handsome Caucasian friend said, hey, these are Sakari. They're daggermen. What the hell are they doing in the wilderness? My brother. There is a man named Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Okay? That's called a kunya. A kunya is an Arabic term. It's a nom de guerre. It's like your call sign when you're going out, right? Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is not his name. Al-Baghdadi means the Baghdadian. My point is, what we hear about the Egyptian is a guerrilla warfare expert. That's who the Sakari was. The fact that he trained them in the wilderness, read Maccabees. In Maccabees, guess where they trained all their guerrilla fighters? The wilderness. You're not going to train your guerrilla fighters in the city so that the Romans can see you and kill you. Okay, here's my point. The Egyptian is going toward Jerusalem in Josephus. He is going away from Jerusalem in Luke. The Egyptian's got 30,000 people in Josephus. He's got 4,000 people in Luke. By the way, the Tribune believes that Paul is the Egyptian because he speaks Greek.
No, he doesn't think he's the Egyptian because he spoke Greek.
I want you to look at the text again.
Right. So it says
pull up the ESV.
Yeah, let's
pull up the ESV.
It's Acts 21.
Yeah. Pull up the ESV.
21 ESV.
Uh-huh.
All right, I'll share the screen real quick, and let me just.
He thought he wasn't. This is my claim. While we get this pulled up, he thought he wasn't the Egyptian because he could speak Greek.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's the opposite. Go ahead.
Okay, where is it? What number?
Acts 21:38.
38.
Yeah.
Paul says, "May I speak?"
Are you not the Egyptian then, who recently stirred up a revolt and led 4,000 men against the assassins of the ruler? Paul replied, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure. I beg you, permit this to people."
Stop. You see right there, verse 37. Paul's about to be brought to the barracks. He said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" He said, "Do you know Greek? Are you not the Egyptian then?"
Oh, so because he knows Greek, he's the Egyptian.
Because he knows Greek, he is the Egyptian.
So you're thinking that means that because he knows Greek, he is the Egyptian.
That's the grammar of the text, bro.
Well, let me see what another translation might say, just to see what we got.
Why don't we check the Greek? I can look at the Greek.
May I say something to you? The Tribune replied, "Do you know Greek? Then you are not." Go look at NRSV.
Oh, hold on. Let's solve this by looking at Greek. Let's not look at translations. All right.
Pull it up.
So I'm gonna pull up. I'm gonna go to Cross Bible right now. Our friend from Cross Bible. Yeah. Is Stephen in the chat right now?
I don't think he is, but this is important because
this is Acts what?
Acts 13. What is it? 21, 38, 37.
Acts 21. Hold on. Give me a second. Let me pull up the Greek and okay. So let me stop sharing this one.
Yeah.
Good thing I know a little bit of thing or two about some Greek here. I can actually assess this. 21 what?
21, 37.
37?
You might as well just read 37 and go to it. Yeah.
37. Do you speak Greek? Aren't you the Egyptian? Uk, ara, su, Egypto. So are you not the Egyptian? It's basically saying.
So what the NRSV, E says, right, is literally this in English, which is why maybe we're both reading two translations and coming to a different conclusion.
But the Greek is where the Greek is king, guys.
Got it. I'm just letting you know the
okay. So according to the Greek,
says, do you know Greek? Then you are not the Egyptian.
Actually, hold on a second. I could be. Then you are not.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you are not the Egyptian. This is saying.
Yeah. But either way,
do me a favor. Do me a favor. Do you guys know what I'm not trying to pull rank here, but do you know what a negative inferential particle construction is?
Yeah, no, I actually think this is I actually think this could be translated, aren't you, or are you are not. But I think both, because it starts off with uk ara, that's emphasizing you are not, you, Sue, you, are uk ara. Are you not I think it could be either or. Are you not the Egyptian or you aren't the Egyptian?
So this is
very confusing. I really think we need another expert on Greek to really look at this.
Well, here's let's do it this way. Just Google negative inferential particle construction. Just Google it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Negative.
There's a reason why the majority of the translators are saying, "Are you not then the Egyptian?" Yeah,
no, I actually agree with you on that. I think this could go either way. Well, I would really like to hear Stephen on this.
My question is this: in the context of that, get him on real quick.
He's got to be home.
He's fluent on Greek. The reason I say this to just
we need you right now.
Highlighting of this translation, Vinny, is that if he was thinking he was because he spoke Greek, I doubt this guy would let him go. That's what I'm trying to say. The context, he goes, "Oh, okay, you're not the guy."
He didn't let him go. He beat him, bro.
So Paul stood on the steps, motioned to the people.
He had him flogged.
When? Before or after?
The very next chapter. And then Paul says, "What are you doing? I'm a Roman citizen."
So the same guy you're saying is one flogged him.
Yes.
Listen to the defense I make to you now. When I heard him addressing them in Hebrew, they became even more quiet. Then he said, "I am a Jew born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel, educated strictly according to the ancestral law, being zealous for God, just as all of you are today. I persecuted this way up to a point of death by binding both men and women and putting them in prison as the high priest and the whole council." Where's this at? Where's it? Where's the beating that this Roman?
Are you in Acts 22?
I'm in Acts 22. Yes.
All right.
The same guy you said that supposedly has him as a prisoner.
All right. Okay, let's go to verse 23, verse 24.
So up to this point, they listened to him, but they shouted, "Away with such a fellow from the earth. He should not be allowed to live." And while they were shouting, throwing off their cloaks and tossing dust into the air, the tribune directed that he was to be brought into the barracks and ordered him to be examined by flogging to find out the reason for the outcry against him. But when they had tied him up with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who is uncondemned?" When the centurion heard that, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? This man is a Roman citizen." So I don't understand how that connects back to the prior chapter with him claiming he was
You said that he just let him go.
All right, hold
And I
on.
was
You
saying,
got
no,
to
he
you're
didn't
gonna
let
head
it
too
go.
far.
He's about to
Let's
flog
solve this first.
But we got this guy. We got this
Yeah,
guy.
Stephen. Okay.
Yeah, Stephen.
We're
What's up, guys?
looking at uk ara su, and there's different translations. ESV says, "Are you not the Egyptians?" Some of them say, "So you are not the Egyptian."
Yeah.
What would you say? I think it could go either way. I think this is very confusing Greek here.
Wait, hold on. Let me. It's a kind of small on screen, but yeah. Well, ara is just marking the question, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
saying, and then uk is so it's
Su,
like,
you.
are you not, or are that's so. hold
Or
on a second
couldn't
here.
it be also "you are not"?
So are you not like?
Well, no.
aren't you?
If you're asking, ara's marking a question, so it's going to be
We're talking about su uk here.
Yeah, aren't is a good translation, but don't use the NIV. Use
Or yeah, ignore this. Ignore this.
yeah, use like the NRSV or
Just
the
ignore that.
That's what I just read, and it says, "Then you are not the Egyptian," because he spoke in Greek.
I use the SV or generally stay with the NASB, but yeah, that's the same construction.
Well,
I have.
obviously, like
Forget about translations. Forget about translations. Let's look at this like where you just discovered it for the first time. What would you think about this text right here?
Hold on. So, what verse?
38. Acts 21:38.
Looking at okay, so
I'm showing it right now on the screen.
37 to 38. That transition.
yeah, ukara si o Egyptios, right? So, are you not the Egyptian? That's the translation.
Right.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
that's pretty
thank you.
clear.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
is it? But so in other words, it's like it's leading with this negation.
It's a light
ukara.
tote, right?
Yeah.
So
So
what's
what?
this? What is the
A light tote,
suggest-
LITOTE.
what is the suggested interpretation? Because as I was just reading, replied, "Do you not know Greek?" And then verse 38 says, "Then you are not the Egyptian who recently stirred up a revolt and led 4,000 assassins out into the wilderness." Paul
What
replied,
I'm saying
"I am
is that the Greek is saying,
Oh, sorry.
do you-
Yeah, no, I misstated. So ara here, you see how it has the acute accent, right? It's not ara marking a question, like I said. It doesn't have a circumflex. So what this means is as a result or then. So then are you not? So it's following from the previous verse. You can't read it in isolation.
But this is what's important though. Then are you not, or then you aren't is a big deal here.
Well, okay, so ara is then. So ara is just marking this boundary between the first clause, the apodosis, and then the I'm sorry,
We're trying to figure out what is uk doing here. Is it saying you aren't, or it's just then aren't you?
it's just negating. It's just saying, it's just phrasing it in the negative by saying like, then are you not the Egyptian? Like, is it not the case that you're the Egyptian? Meaning that person is making, so they're pushing back against a positive claim.
Okay.
So what's that mean?
He's inferring that Paul speaks Greek, and so because Paul speaks Greek, then you are the Egyptian.
Yeah, it's like, but Elenistiki noskis, so that you speak Greek, that's a question. And then are you not the Egyptian? So he's
Look
inferring.
At my favorite translation, NASB says, then you are not the Egyptian.
That's what I'm saying. Read the
one of the more
NRSV.
accurate. Yeah, this is
I
one
understand, but the Greek expert is telling us what it is.
Well,
No. I'm just wondering why the translators would do that.
Because it's probably going to depend on whether or not the critical edition puts a question mark or not. Those question marks are not there in the
original
manuscript.
This is what I'm trying to. This is why I needed to call you. I couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah.
I can't tell.
So it's a question of, did the editors of the Greek reconstruction decide this is probably a question and put a question mark on it? Or did they decide that this is an affirmative statement and not put the question on it? And then downstream from that is going to be the translator's decision. So which Greek text are you going to defer to? The one that has a question mark or the one that doesn't? And that's a subjective opinion. It's not like a cold, hard fact.
That's okay. So I think this could go either way. I think both of you could be correct. We just don't have
the flow of the text. The flow of the text makes a lot more sense. You speak Greek, you must be the Egyptian.
And my
it's the most natural reading.
I think the final thing I would say on this, and we should move on to Q&A, continue, is that when you read it, if he was an Egyptian, Paul should have replied. I mean, if he thought he was the Egyptian, Paul literally says, "I'm a Jew. I'm not this Egyptian. I'm a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia."
Actually, if the Egyptian was a Greek speaker, where would he come from?
Yeah,
where would a sophisticated Greek-speaking Jew come from?
He could have come from Egypt, Alexandria.
Alexandria.
Yeah.
Now there is a geographer named Strabo. Do you know that he says that there's a city that rivals Alexandria in philosophical rigor? You know what city that is?
Jerusalem.
Tarsus.
Right? Oh, okay. I'm
Tarsus.
thinking Jerusalem. There's a lot of competition between Athens
Tarsus,
and Jerusalem.
which explains why he says no means city, right?
So okay. So either
He's
way,
saying, I'm not from an obscure city. I'm not from Alexandria. My point is that explicitly and implicitly in this discussion, we find out that the Egyptian is a Greek-speaking Jew from Egypt. We don't get any of that information.
I don't buy that because if you read Josephus.
Oh, wait, just give me 1 second. Let me 1 second.
Okay.
The Greek speaker here said that this is definitely a plausible interpretation of that question, right?
Both are.
But they're not equal.
No, they are equal. They are equal.
Well, the Greek speaker came. Well,
right.
Let me ask,
no, I think it can go either way.
The Greek speaker person, are they equal? Are they like, or is one more than the other in your view?
So Stephen in our SV says.
Oh, let Stephen answer that question. That's a good question.
I know. I'm saying one says, then are you not the Egyptian? Like a question, like aren't you? And the
let
other
him answer the question. Hold on, Derek. Let him answer it. Did you get the question that he asked you? You just said it could go either way, right? I think.
Are you not the Egyptian, or you are not the Egyptian?
Which one?
Both is it 50-50, or is one more likely to you than the other?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So he's asking, do you speak Greek? That's a question, right? Ukarasi o Egyptios o protuton ton imeron Anastatosas que exagogon istin erimon ton tus tetrakischilius andras ton sicarios.
Yeah, the whole thing is a question. So
the whole thing is a question because the verse is marked with a question mark at the end, which is an editorial choice. That's probably the correct choice. So like the NASB takes that and says, then you are not the Egyptian who sometimes. Well, the thing is though, okay. Even translations that say then you are not, right? The NASB does that because it's trying to just keep the English words more or less in line with the Greek. It's like an interlinear, but it's still a question. Mm-hmm. So if you were to say this in English, then you would say, then you are not the Egyptian. In other words, like you're claiming to be the Egyptian. So you're not the Egyptian, right?
Okay.
As opposed to then are you not the Egyptian?
So Vinny is on the more probable sides of what you're saying.
Like at the end of the day, we have to just say, we know that this is a question. He's not affirming, but then you are the Egyptian. He's putting it on Paul. He's shifting the burden on Paul to confirm whether or not he is the Egyptian.
And what does his answer say? I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, not Egypt.
Yes.
A city of no obscure city. There's no city mentioned. The only thing that's mentioned is Egypt.
That's why we would have to factor in the fact that if you're taking my hypothesis, and this is Steve Mason's, he calls this person an Egyptian because everyone else is either a Jew or a Samaritan. That's why he's called the Egyptian. His mother didn't name him the Egyptian. That name was given to him by the historians who are recognizing that you have another prophet type figure who is now different from Jews and Samaritans. That's why Josephus talks about the Samaritan who also went up to Gerizim talking like Moses and the tablets and the temple and all that. He gets killed. So I'm saying the Egyptian is a Josephian word used for a guy who was from Egypt. He was an Egyptian. He wasn't a Jew. He wasn't a Samaritan.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, as I said, today we've got a guy named Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Baghdadi. We've got.
Is he from Baghdad?
I know for a fact we were chasing dudes from Syria. We called them the Syrian. Right. So this is standard in the East. It's called a kunya. It's a nom de guerre. Everybody has one. The fact of the matter is the flow of the conversation is self-contained. He says, "Aren't you the Egyptian?" There's no reason for Paul to mention Tarsus. All he has to do is mention Sicilia because the Tribune doesn't mention a city. What I'm saying is that the explicit question carries with it the implication of Alexandria, which is why he brings up Tarsus as a competing city.
We disagree.
There's no reason. There's no reason to mention Tarsus, and there's no reason to say that it's not an obscure city.
I would say there is.
You're competing with Alexandria. Now, give me 1 second. So here's what we've got. Luke's got 30,000. He chops it down by 26,000.
Just like Josephus chopped it down.
He's going to. No, he didn't. Josephus went from 4,000 to 30.
Well, I agree. But I'm saying there's 4,000, right? He exaggerates.
Let me just finish here. So he went from, because we said he's stealing from antiquities. So he went from 30,000 down to 4,000. He went from towards Jerusalem via the Mount of Olives, stays in the wilderness. He calls himself a prophet. Luke doesn't exploit it. There is nothing in this text other than the fact that the guy's called the Egyptian, and the implication that the Egyptian speaks Greek and may be from Alexandria. That's also nowhere in the Josephine literature. So what I'm saying is, if this guy,
I need 3 minutes since you've gone on so long.
If this guy,
undivided attention, no cutting me off or nothing.
This Tribune, well, you've cut me off a couple times.
No, I know, but I can't. I figure it's like, so we're going to go on a long diatribe. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
go ahead, land that plane, man.
Right, finish.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Say what you have to say.
It's like you've gone on and on and on about it. I get it, and I think we should move on in the Q&A, because at the end of the day, we don't see this the same way. And I would argue in the Bible, you have rewrites.
Well, I think we see it the same way.
No, I don't. I think we disagree on this interpretation.
Well, you don't believe that Josephus had the guy in the wilderness. You believe Josephus had him
inner
on
city. Inner city. Yeah.
You don't have him in the wilderness.
No, because I think that there were prophets in the wilderness that were separate.
And you don't have the numbers either, right?
No, and
so we're agreeing on the numbers.
Even the biblical account, when it rewrites stories like David's numbering of the armies, he changes numbers. The later biblical authors don't even keep the numbers the same.
We're talking about the Egyptians.
I know, but this is an important point, because in the Bible itself, the sacred literature of Christianity, the canon, the Bible doesn't even keep consistent numbers. Numbers are fluid all the time. That's not a defeater to the idea that someone borrowed from something. We know they rewrote David's stories and whitewashed his story to erase the murder. The later stories don't have him murdering and doing the things that he did in the earlier stories within the biblical account. And the numbers don't match. The numbers, you want me to pull up the sources to show you the contradiction?
Just let me know when I can talk.
Well, I got 90 seconds in there? I'm good. I'm just saying that the Bible does that. That's what I'm saying.
All right, so back to the Egyptian. We both agree that the number is vastly different. He goes with the less dramatic number. We both agree that the directions are diametrically opposed to one another. And we both agree that he's called a prophet in Josephus, and he's just represented as a guerrilla warrior in Luke. So there are no parallels to this guy other than his name.
I disagree. I do think they go. I think when you read Josephus, he does have the desert. He does have Sakari. He does have the Egyptian. The problem is they're three different groups. They're not the same. What does Luke do? Conflates it into a single sentence, acting like it's all under one person.
You have to assume that Luke is borrowing from Josephus in order to make that work.
And I think there's a really good case to be made, because Sakari goes. There's 19 examples of the Sakari in this long.
The Tribune would have used that language, right?
I would just. I think all the elements are conflated.
Is that
there.
fair? Would the Tribune have used the term Sakari?
I don't think he would. Sakari was a Latin loanword in Greek.
And what was the language? What was the lingua franca of the? What was the bridge language between Aramaic and Greek?
I understand that, but there's not a single source that uses that term apart from Josephus, and Luke only mentions it once.
Well, we've already talked about all the hapax legomena in Luke. Because if you're dealing with terminal window 1, you're going to have those things, because the other authors didn't focus on it.
Hapax legomena is used 19 times in Josephus and once in Luke.
It's not a hapax legomena if Luke uses it, right?
No one else is using it. My point is
hapax legomena means that you're the only one that did it.
I agree, but the point is that 19 times in Josephus
it means it's the only time it happens in a corpus. It doesn't mean
but it's a unique term used 19 times by Josephus. Luke gives one sentence blurb, and it's not even
because it's the Tribune. Is it irrational to believe that a Tribune would have used that term?
I doubt he would have used a term that is literally couched.
I'm asking you if it's rational.
Right, and I'm answering it. I doubt it's rational to think that this Tribune would be using Josephine language that's unique.
Do you think Josephus invented the term Sakari?
I think he is the only person. Show me any Roman sources that actually show the term Sakari.
No, I'm asking if you believe Josephus originated the term.
I would be.
It's a yes or no question.
I don't know if he originated the term. I want evidence of a source that uses that term other than Josephus. I have evidence to support. Yeah,
Luke
one
uses it.
time I understand, but that's the only time that's used.
You
That's
guys
what I'm
want to see it in a TLG? I just pulled it up.
Yeah, let's see what you got.
What's
Share
a
your screen.
TLG?
I mean,
Yeah.
we're getting lost.
So
I want to get
the
these
TLG
screenshots.
is the official database of all digitized Greek texts from the University of Irvine. I pulled it up here on the screen. So the very first, this is sorted by let's sort it by date, earliest, right?
Oh, I have this in a physical.
So we have it in Luke, right? And then we have basically Josephus. There is no earlier attestation of this word in the Greek, in the surviving Greek literature. Josephus uses it like crazy.
Which is why.
And then we
It
get
doesn't actually
Luke.
mean anything in Greek, though.
well,
It doesn't mean anything in
there's-
Greek or Hebrew. It's actually a Latin word.
Exactly.
Derek does make a good point here.
Sicca. It's a sicca.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. Unless in Latin.
A tribune who's responsible for finding this guy and taking him out, you're saying it's completely irrational to believe that he would have used that term?
I'm saying that his
That's the question I'm asking. But I'm
I know.
asking
If you want a yes,
specific
no.
question.
You gotta let him answer the question.
You're not letting me talk.
Yeah, let him answer the question. He's trying to answer.
I really think we should get to Q&A because this is.
We
All
are.
right, go ahead. Let's go to
I'd
Q&A.
rather.
No, but this is
continue
good.
Q&A.
This is a good
I
specific
understand.
topic.
I'm saying what Steve Mason's saying. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm literally trying to repeat what an expert who's done this for decades, who's read all of Josephus. He's an expert in Josephus.
I know, bro, but if I ask you a question, I'm just trying to get an answer. Bro.
Yeah,
No,
just
I know.
answer the question.
Well, repeat the question again.
Yes
Is it
or
rational,
no?
right?
Is it rational to believe that the tribune who's responsible to find this guy and take him out, is it completely irrational to believe that he would use that term?
Not completely.
Okay.
I just think that I think it's evident when you read Josephus. If you gave me the couched historical context Josephus gives, which is a mountain of information with people's names, there's so much historical baggage there, and then you compare it to a one sentence line in Luke. I just don't find that as convincing that a one sentence line is as convincing as a larger body of literature from Josephus.
Well, yeah, one sentence line about 4,000 people versus 30,000 people, and you believe that Luke's number is more accurate, right?
I believe Luke's number is more accurate.
You don't believe that 30,000 people showed up at the gate of Jerusalem?
I don't think that any number can be plausibly explained when Wars doesn't give us an exact number, just as a large crowd.
Just so you guys know,
there's 400 killed.
Just so you guys know, the word Sicarii in Latin is well attested. There's a law that was passed by Sulla in 81 BC called the Lex Cornelia de Sicarius. And it's a law that was basically going around and targeting people who carry weapons, daggers. So this is a term that existed in Latin being used by Josephus for a Roman audience. It makes sense there.
That's what Steve.
That's the argument.
Yeah. For a Roman audience, I agree. The tribune is an officer of the Roman military deployed specifically to take care of that region. He gets an intel report just like you get an intel report about Baghdadi, right?
That's fair. Okay.
Yeah.
He was born in Iraq, so he's called Baghdadi. Go ahead.
Let's go to the next question, right? We're good with that? We good on that?
Yeah, I'm good.
Right. Bach and Pan, thank you for the super chat. Wouldn't the more Romanized in Luke, wouldn't that promote that Luke was written later in a more Greek audience? Wasn't Jesus and followers anti-Roman?
I think when he says Romanized, I think he's talking about your point.
For example,
Derek,
using terms like Sicarii. That's a Romanized.
I think he was Derek. You brought up how Acts always has the Romans as the good guys and the Jews as the bad guys.
Typically,
so
yeah,
when
you don't have
anti-Roman here. I think that's what he's talking about.
Luke, wouldn't that promote that Luke was written later in a more Greek audience? Wasn't Joseph? Well, according to Richard Purvo, who wrote the Hermeneia commentary on Acts, he's thinking he's writing in Ephesus because Ephesus gets a huge window of time in the narrative, which would put it, of course, closer to Rome. But I don't. Wouldn't the more Romanized in Luke? I'm having a hard time.
Can you rephrase that question?
Yeah, that's
the more Romanized is tripping me up. I think what he's saying is what you were talking about, how Acts has a generally pro.
I think, if I may, Vinny, Jesus and followers anti-Roman. So there's this idea that not all these gospels are portraying Rome in a positive light. And I wonder, I'm having a hard time with this one. I'm not going to lie.
No, but I think, remember how you were saying that Acts has the.
I think I understand what they're saying
and the
here.
Romans is the good guys.
I think Bach is saying I think Bakken's saying, is it the fact that Luke has a more pro-Roman vibe going on, wouldn't that attest to it being later because it's written for a Greek audience?
Well, that could. It doesn't prove it, though. I mean, look, I'll tell you this, Vinny, and you probably appreciate this. Before this debate, I've come across some scholars, I mean, a ton, who are second century daters, right? They have arguments from, they think Luke knows Pliny's letters, and they have arguments about the how that went on. There are some scholars who actually argue with Papias that they believe Luke knows Papias. In his prologue, he hints at an orderly account. Some have even argued that in Eusebius's church history in book 4, it describes Luke Acts under Hadrian. Like, all of this stuff I dropped because I was like, you know what? I'm not, like, it seemed a little more flimsy. I just thought the best thing I could do was focus on Josephus. That was more than enough anyway. Look at what we couldn't even cover and how much more there's probably not even discussed in this discussion. But there are later date ideas, and some would probably couch some of that. The other language is like ecclesiological language, they think, in Luke Acts that doesn't appear till you see some of the church fathers writing in it. So they think the language in Luke Acts sounds like a later church ecclesiastical setup. That's stuff that I'm not prepared to defend, man. I'm not going to pretend like I can get on here and defend Greek or act like I can get in the weeds of those things. It wasn't my intentions.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, thank you for that question. The next,
I would say that the episode with James the Just is very instructive here. James is killed by Jews in 62, and the people go to Albinus, and Albinus demotes Ananus. And so that is pro-Roman, anti-Jew. The real issue is for the Romans, they didn't see, especially in the first century, they didn't see a real difference between Christianity and Judaism. They just thought this is an intramural spat between these people. I don't care about this stuff. And so they don't have a positive view of Christians. They just have more of a, dismissive view of Christianity. But I think that, the pro-Roman stuff is overplayed. It's just that the Romans did not see them as a threat yet. And so when the Jews were bringing them to trial, they didn't have anything against them. So that's what happened.
All right. The next one is, why is Paul able to call an army when he goes to last trip in Jerusalem? Could it be that Paul was a Herodian who gets to just call on Caesar?
Hold on. Called an army? I don't recall.
Why is Paul able to call? Basically, why does he get to appeal to Caesar? And then, he gets bodyguards that are going to carry him over to these places.
If I could give a short answer, is a lot of people question Paul appearing before Nero. Skeptical, critical scholars, if you will, that think that this is more legendary accounts. There's even people who are questioning the entire Fire of Rome persecution of Christians as potential legend as well. And I'm just telling you, there are really skeptical positions on this. If you read Candida Moss's book, A Myth of Persecution, she describes a lot of this stuff. So I don't know. I think we're dealing with a narrative that is trying to tell you a theological story. I think Vinny might have a different answer, of course. But the army part is where I'm like, I don't know what they mean by army.
Yeah, I think he's probably, because Paul had an escorted guard.
Okay, that's probably what they mean.
So and it was obviously people in the military, but I don't think that Paul had the pull to call an army. These were Roman procedures. That's why I read that that in my closing in the opening, I talked about the historian Swisher. I'm sorry, Anne Sherwin-White, and this guy is an expert on the legal side of first century Rome. And so he specifically states that Luke is perfect on his procedural accounting in the book of Acts. So that's why I don't think he was a Herodian. These are things that you get as a Roman citizen. I like the way that you think, Bakken. It's very outside the box. Paul got James killed. He's Herodian. I just don't see it there.
All right. Thank you for that super chat. Good question.
Appreciate that.
Tracy, thank you for the 5. Wasn't there an apocryphal book about Paul talking to Nero or Claudius?
Yes.
There is.
There's several, actually. But the main one, I think I brought up, and didn't you bring up one too, Vinny? Was it the same Acts of Paul?
The same one. His neck gets chopped off the milk, and then he rises from the dead.
Yeah. Yeah. So
really
there's some really, I think they're cool.
You got sources of Simon Magus talking to, I think, Claudius or Nero, or one of the two. I think or both, maybe.
Yeah.
Shoot, Apollonius of Tyana appears before Domitian. You know, I mean, there's all sorts of legends out there floating around. I think it's a fanciful story, but it's still cool. And I think a lot of hagiography was encouraging to a lot of people in the early Christian, world. So
I think the purpose of this question was for you, Vinny, when you brought up why wouldn't the author of Acts just include a passage of Paul talking to Nero?
Yeah. And this is one of my reasons. There's a reason that there's an appetite for this stuff.
Yeah, so I agree. By the way, I agree with that. I agreed with you when you were bringing that critique up about the whole, what was it, Ignatius talking about the letter to the Romans and the fetish for dying. I agree. I don't think all Christians had the same ideas, though. I wouldn't say they're all univocal. You know what I mean?
The overwhelming idea in the 2nd century was that martyrdom equaled victory. Okay?
I agree.
So the reason that you have apocryphal books like that is because Acts was monumentally disappointing to the early church. And so you needed stuff like that to fill in the blanks. I'm sorry, but what we have to say about Luke is that he is the most restrained author with a theological agenda ever. Never mentions any of the supernatural claims, never mentions the sacred geography, never mentions the destruction of Jerusalem, never mentions Peter, never mentions Paul, never mentions James, never mentions the fire, never mentions Nero.
He's just
the most restrained guy ever.
Yeah, but I do want to point something out about martyrdom. That word in Greek just means to witness.
Yeah.
So the idea of martyrs being people who are killed, I think that sort of is a progression over time with being people who
actually it has multiple meanings. It depends on the context.
By the 2nd century, martyr meant you were dead, and confessor meant that you gave witness, because that's where matreo comes from, right? But you were a confessor if you were persecuted, but not to death. So confessors were persecuted people, and martyrs were those who got killed by the 2nd century.
If I may, though, just you made a comment about.
I don't know, that might be a little early for me. I think that terminology is a little later than that.
So let me just address a few things. You said you brought up that he isn't like exaggerating on the miraculous stuff, and I know you were saying that with Josephus he does a lot of self-attribution. This, and I would say an anonymous author who is writing Luke Acts isn't doing that to himself. But I do find the book of Acts.
No, when I say self-designation, I'm talking about Josephus saying this guy claimed to be a prophet. So he talks about the self-designation of the subject.
Okay, so when you, that's something that confused me, because when I turn every page on Acts, there's so many miracles and miraculous things that are happening. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you were saying.
I'm talking specifically about Judas, Theudas, and the Egyptian. He never talks about them claiming to be prophets, never talks about anything supernatural, always just has them as guerrilla warriors. He doesn't bring up any sacred space. No, I'm talking about Luke, bro.
Oh, yeah, but he said, I thought he says Theudas does go and try to split, lead people out here to do these wonders and whatnot. I thought he mentions that. I mean,
yeah, I think pretty sure Josephus mentions the Jordan River. Luke does not mention the Jordan River.
Yeah, there's so much.
He never mentions the sacred space ever with those three.
So when you say sacred space, what do you mean by sacred space?
We're talking about the Jordan River. Jesus is getting baptized. There's a lot of theological import. Mount of Olives, very important. Jerusalem, unique. Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives are uniquely important to Luke.
Okay.
And he doesn't mention it with the Egyptian. That's a problem.
Yeah, I just think that he's selective, or he's half-ass reading Josephus. That's my thought.
Yeah, but a guy who half-ass reads is not going to get Asiarch, Politarch, and all the other details he got down perfectly.
You're not talking.
You can't
about
have it both ways.
Josephus. No, that's different people. You're not talking about stuff from Josephus when you mention that, right?
I'm talking about his behavior as an author. He gets very picayune details down to 12 months, bro. So if he's an author like that, your speculation that he just messed up on Josephus does not match his methodology.
So, but wouldn't you be speculating that he actually got that material somehow himself? You don't know that, right?
I wasn't speculating.
But you're making speculation.
What I'm saying is that the evidence. What I'm saying is that we've got two premises, right? One premise is that he borrowed from Josephus. The other is not. And what I'm saying is with the motivations that you say that Luke has, it is inexplicable that he would not mention the sacred space and the theological self-designation of the people that he's talking about.
How do
That's
we know
what I'm
that?
saying.
I'm saying, how do we know that he needed to narrate every single one of these things in order to pass?
He doesn't. He doesn't. What we're talking about is his behavior as an author. So if he mentions Jerusalem significantly more than anybody else combined, if he mentions the Mount of Olives, and you say he is a theological / apologetic, I'm sorry, but you got a guy who is a false Christ on the Mount of Olives from a hostile source.
Right.
No, the Egyptian is not put to death in Josephus.
No, he escapes. I know.
Right. So the Egyptian is a false prophet on the Mount of Olives going into Jerusalem, and he doesn't exploit it.
That might be why he mentions that.
He didn't mention it.
No, I'm saying that might be why. But what I'm saying is that might be why he mentioned him at all. He didn't narrate. Oh, and by the way, he was on that mountain, and he may not have even.
He did. He gave us the location, though. The location was the wilderness.
Right, but I'm saying he may not have found it necessary to give all that additional information when we find all three of those in 3 different paragraphs.
Bro.
Again, I think we get both of your points. I think we got.
We're not talking about what's necessary. We're talking about his pattern as an author.
I agree.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
We're seeing this pattern.
Yeah, it's not. You guys are. There's no way both of you.
But here's the thing: we're not seeing it differently. You agree that Luke mentions Jerusalem twice as much as everybody else. You agree. You're not contesting that Jerusalem is mentioned in Acts and that the Mount of Olives is very, very important to Luke. So we're not disagreeing on that.
Right.
What I'm saying is that evidence leads me to believe that he's operating from a different document than Josephus in the same way that you, in the same place that Q is, right? You believe that Q is around, don't you?
People have constructed action. Yes. Here's the thing. That's a plausible hypothesis, right?
Have we found Q?
Real quick, let me give a little bit of couched context to this point, because there are real scholarship.
Define Q for people, by the way.
So, yeah. So there's a source that Matthew and Luke seemingly draw material from that they don't get from Mark. That is where they're getting their information. It's kind of a pre-gospel, a sayings kind of gospel, typically, depends on which scholar reconstructs it. But this is a real academic philological endeavor. And no, we don't have Q. The scholars they deduct that there's something there because of the common material that they share that Mark doesn't have. However, never has in the history of this topic, which I think this is a great debate, has anyone tried to reconstruct that common source or to find where that common source is. That's a problem. For me, I'm going to go with known sources before I come up with hypothetical non-known sources. That's the only difference between us.
This is entirely hypothetical.
I think it's more probable with what we have.
You're saying that Luke has none of the similarities to the Egyptian because he just ignored them for some strange reason. He has
the Egyptian, he has the Sakari, and he has the wilderness. And if you go read Antiquities 20, all 3 of those, without the other context, are in that passage. He got all 3 and conflated them into one sentence. That's all I'm saying. It's that simple.
Again, you are assuming Josephus.
And you're assuming a source you don't have evidence for.
Yeah,
No, I'm not assuming a source. I'm not assuming a source.
You just said.
Listen, what I'm saying is that the evidence, there's a difference between saying, I just believe Josephus. What I'm saying is that the evidence based on Josephus's literature and Luke's literature, not just from Acts, but Luke as well, because everybody's looking at it, is completely contradictory to the way that Luke functions with Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. That's the argument.
So. Okay. But we get your point, though. I just agree with that.
Him leaving that out, all right. Guy that mentions Jerusalem and the Mount of, the guy is on the, I'm using this now in apologetics. There's a dude at the Mount of Olives claiming to be the Messiah. Okay. But Luke doesn't use it. Okay.
Because it's in Zechariah. Right. So any Messiah is going to try to go to the Mount of Olives and fulfill Zechariah.
I agree, but only one but they've got Jesus saying from the Mount of Olives itself that false Christs are coming.
And there were many.
This guy posts up on the Mount of Olives.
Josephus literally said many. Many did that.
I'm just going to leave this. You're saying Luke looked at that and goes,
all of those texts that you just mentioned are written after the Egyptian lived. Do you understand?
What do you mean by that?
So when was the Egyptian around?
That goes more to my point. The Egyptian is still alive by the time at the writing of this text.
What do you mean? The gospel, the Luke?
In the timeline of Acts, the Egyptian is still alive. He's at large.
Right, but it's written. I'm saying it's written later. Even if I go with your dating, it's still written 50 years after the Egyptian was around.
Right. That's even worse, right?
No, it's just saying they have knowledge.
Now,
they can have knowledge of this.
Well, maybe why doesn't he mention the Mount of Olives? What do you think?
Know. Here, I think he mentions enough. That,
do you think that a false prophet getting stopped at the Mount of Olives, do you think that would have any apologetic import?
I will say this, Vinny.
I'm going to ask Gnostic informant.
I think it's. I don't think it's necessary. I think it would have been interesting to include that, but maybe he just didn't.
I didn't ask if it was necessary. I'm just saying.
So now you're debating me and the moderator.
Hold on.
Listen, we need to move
Vinny,
forward.
I've been debating the moderator.
Hold on, Vinny. You asked me a question. I agree with what Derek said. There's enough in both Josephus and Luke to make me think Luke knows Josephus. There's enough. You're saying why isn't it all there? I don't know. You're asking me a question that I can't answer.
I'm asking a very specific question. Luke clearly is focused on Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. We agree.
So he should be there.
He mentions it twice as much. He mentions it twice as much as any gospel author.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow. That's a non sequitur.
Well, hold on. No. I'm asking you a question. Luke mentions Jerusalem more than anybody in the Gospels. We agree.
Yeah, you already established that. By
a significant number. He's got 28 chapters in Acts. He mentions Jerusalem 59 times.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if we can ask Luke why he didn't include it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Now, here's a question
I have for you. He does have stuff from Josephus.
Here's a question. I got a question for you, though.
He has stuff from Josephus, though.
Wait a second. But
it's not my debate.
Things. No, it's okay. It's okay. He has things from Josephus. When I did the Terminal Window 2, did you get the same three people?
No, actually, no. I mentioned. I thought of FDR. I actually failed your. You actually failed your thing.
FDR is not in Terminal Window 2, bro. Terminal Window 2 is Europe.
Oh, then I wasn't. I just thought you were talking about World War II in general. Sorry.
It says right there, Terminal Window Europe, World War II.
Yeah, I didn't understand.
Okay, so then you didn't get the point. So I see why you're saying what you're saying. Let's go to the next one.
Yeah. Let's go.
Next super chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's try to get through the Q&A.
All right. No, I'm having fun though. Yeah. Derek, how do you know Luke is wrong and or backwards? How are you determining what is correct?
Yeah. So again, this is going to be a subjective observation based on the material that I'm comparing. And I would also then go, here's some of the problems. If I were to address this, I would say, well, let's just get Paul's letters. This is the man, not the companion, supposedly, the we passages we didn't even get into, which I was prepared for, but that's a whole different discussion. The companion doesn't even agree with the letters. In many areas, there's contradictions between both. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, if Paul doesn't agree with Paul based on a companion of Paul, maybe he made mistakes. Maybe his memory wasn't perfect based on Paul's own letters. And then I'm looking at Josephus, who, by the way, is the standard historian for this region. That doesn't mean he's right either, but he is an authority who has 20 volumes that is writing on a historical basis of what's happening in Judea, going back through the history. And he's tracking each ruler very carefully, especially under Herod. He's very meticulous about other characters that didn't get brought up, all sorts of stuff. And I'm looking at that and I'm comparing both, and I see the language is used frequently all throughout his work, and reading it in sequential order. I'm going, this guy is literally giving you so much insight. And then I'm looking at Luke, one sentence. My reliability of thinking Luke has all this information insight that is historical, I'm going to go with the guy who has it couched under all of this
Derek, not to cut you off. I think you're saying Josephus is right and Luke is wrong.
Oh, Theudas. This is a Theudas thing.
Yeah. How are you determining which one is right and which one is wrong?
Well, I would argue, and I am relying more on, I think that a more trustworthy account is Josephus, and I think my opponent is saying Luke's more trustworthy at the end of the day, period. And what I would say is this: Josephus, one of the most careful times he documents people that are doing uprisings, Judas, there's other people, Zadok, other people that are in Josephus's writings. He never mentions a Theudas at all in any of that material, but he does mention a Theudas under Cuspius Fatus in 44 CE. This is the other odd thing too that becomes a problem. If you see that, as Steve Mason and other experts like Mark Goodacre, the various other people, M. David Litwell, all sorts of scholars have identified and been convinced by this. Richard Purvo, who wrote the Hermeneia commentary, all of them, they're looking at that and they're going, hold up. Theudas? How does Gamaliel know about a Theudas that came before a Judas when this same guy named Theudas is doing a similar thing that Josephus is describing? And he's documenting, Gamaliel is supposedly speaking about a man where Josephus documents him living in the 40s. He dies in 44 CE under Cuspius Fatus. That's half a decade to a decade after Gamaliel's speech. So how does Gamaliel know about Theudas? This is a problem that historians, scholars, and such have been identifying and saying, hey, the most apologists will say, guess what? And not my opponent today, but Vinny wouldn't say this. He has a different approach, but they usually pull a 2 Theudas card. Oh, it's just another one. And it's like, okay, they're just trying to get out of the pickle that there's a historical problem with what's going on there. And I hope I've answered the question for Tracy.
Yeah, I think you did. It was a good question. And do you want to explain why you think Luke is right and Josephus is wrong, maybe? Or no?
Well, I don't think that Josephus is completely wrong. I do think there was an Egyptian. I don't think that he went to the Mount of Olives with 30,000 people.
Well, this is Theudas.
The Theudas. This is determining. That is very.
I try not to interrupt y'all. So
but the question was about Theudas, though.
I'm trying to develop that. He doesn't say Theudas here. All he says is, how do you know that Luke is wrong and backwards? How are you determining?
I'm just saying, I remember when the question came up. I remember when the question came up. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm just trying to help you out.
Just let me know when I can talk.
Go ahead. Okay.
So really what this has to do is I believe uncritically that Josephus is a more credentialed scholar because look, I mean, we saw in the debate, the Roman government said that he was the authority. So I just think that this is a presupposition that folks have, and I think it's a very weak one, and I think that got exposed. I think that it's clear that people that know about Josephus knows that he has chronology issues. He's got look, if you're writing a 20-volume work, okay, you're gonna have flaws somewhere. I don't think that Josephus is crazy. I think Josephus is a dude trying to survive, and I don't think that he made people up. I just think that we have to take into account, just like we have to take into account Luke's agenda, Josephus has an agenda. And so that's how I look at it. So if you're talking to me about like big picture, how do you find the big picture about what's going on in the Roman world? I still go to Josephus. If you're talking about the particulars, it's without question that Luke is way better at the granular particulars than anybody. Forget Josephus, anybody. So that's my paradigm. I don't take, I look at both. I do look at Luke as inspired, but I don't really take that when I'm looking at Luke. I'm looking at Luke as a historical document about what's going on, knowing full well the man has an obvious agenda. And I think Christians need to be honest about that agenda, because once you get it, then you'll realize that the ending makes absolutely zero sense.
Okay. Thank you for that. Stephanie Byer, thank you for the 5. Why does Paul give power to Titus to name elders in every city? Does anyone named Titus fulfill prophecy?
Interesting. I don't recall in Acts this idea. And maybe I'm missing something. Do you know what specifically, Vinny?
No, this is in the book of Titus in the disputed pastorals. He tells Titus to appoint elders in every city, as I taught you, something like that. So he's saying, where is Titus getting the authority to appoint elders? There's no prophecy about him. Where is he getting this power from? I think is what he's saying.
Okay.
Who gave him this?
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, imagine Paul. I mean, he was considering himself an apostle. I mean, this guy was, on the ground, running around with the gospel. I would imagine Paul would be the one who is at least giving him some authority to be able to do these things. But I don't know about the Titus fulfill prophecy part. So I'm ignorant of that.
Yeah, I think there is an assumption that if somebody's appointing an elder, that must mean that he's like a supernatural figure. The reality is, the facts on the ground are, if you're doing guerrilla warfare, if any sort of decentralized group where you don't have like a Rome or centralized leadership, you have to appoint leaders all over the place. Al-Qaeda did this very well, unfortunately. Like, they had a guy, but if you could read a Quran and run around in the wilderness a little bit with an AK-47, now you're on the team. And so The church was decentralized until basically the 4th century. That's how we kept going. But that would explain why Paul does that with Titus.
Okay.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you for that super chat. The next one is from Back in Pan again. Thank you. Josephus called both Israelite nationalists and Edomite rebels, Sakari, as zealots. Are the Dead Sea Scrolls, War Scrolls, and Damascus document relevant to Luke?
So I would contest the first part, just Bakken. Speaking with, this is actually a well-known scholarly issue. A lot of scholars, again, I was trying to paint this in my closing, I believe. Scholars looked at Josephus as just an encyclopedia. Like, oh, I'll open a book and it's just full of facts. And I think me and Vinny both agree. No, he has an agenda. He's writing a history from a story standpoint. It's not raw data that's facts. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's some facts in there, no doubt, but like, the dude has a bias in what he's writing. And the Sakari are specifically knife-wielding assassins that are inner-city knife-wielding assassins. Steve Mason documents this at large to point out they actually don't show up till the 50s. Once you have this like a political coup where Jonathan the high priest is being assassinated, that these particular inner-city assassins were so bad, and it was happened so prevalent, that friends would not want to get close to friends in public spaces for fear that their friends were like trying to take them out. So I don't think, all I'm saying is I wouldn't connect necessarily Edomite rebels. I don't know. I mean, that's the zealots is another thing because you get zealots attached to Judas, the Galilean, which is a different.
Because I don't know if the Sakari are ever referenced as Edomites. I don't know if that's ever.
That's what I'm saying. It seems like there's a connecting of things that are going on. But
I think that. Okay, so John of Gischala is trapped in the temple until around 62, when interestingly Josephus says an earthquake happened. John escapes, kills Ananus, and then things get really, really bad. What John does is there's a detachment of Idumeans, and Idumeans would be translated to Edomite. Okay, it's like Herod, the Idumean. And there was an Idumean contingent that joined up with John of Gischala to overthrow the Romans. So when John escaped from the temple, he then lets in the Idumeans, and they come together. So
it might be talking about Masada too, because that wasn't Edom. So maybe
Masada wasn't. No. You're right. But,
yeah.
Specifically, when John of Gischala takes over the temple court in Jerusalem, he lets in the Idumeans as an auxiliary force. Because remember, when the Romans were outside, they had armies. So you had Gauls, you had everybody. It wasn't just the Italians there.
Right.
And so John of Gischala lets in these Idumeans because he knows he needs an auxiliary force. Well, the Idumeans are technically Edomites. They're mortal enemies of the Jews. And so that's why you couldn't walk too close to people because of the phenomenology of they both look the same, but the guy's an Edomite and they still have unfinished business, whatever. Really interesting. But yeah, that's Josephus. I thought that Josephus was right there. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
The War Scrolls in Damascus, a lot of that stuff is like really apocalyptic. I would say that Revelation definitely, you want to talk about lifting stuff and whatever. And it makes sense because John was a disciple of John the Baptist, who was an Essene, I assume. I don't know your opinion on that. But
I think
the Essenes were in Qumran. They had all this War Scroll stuff. And then once you know it, Revelation has all of these allusions to the War Scroll, the battle between gods and men or whatever. So that's my opinion on it.
I just want to echo and say, yeah, I agree. I think John's apocalypticism is, at least if there's no direct genealogy, there's something going on. And so I think we're in agreement here, and we're both parallel maniacs. I'm just kidding. All right, let's get the next one.
That was pretty direct. John was, especially considering he was. I think. Do you think John the Baptist was an Essene or what?
I do.
There's a lot of
or adjacent to. I think the term Essene can mean a lot of different things. Because especially how Josephus even says the Essenes are everywhere. They're in all these different cities. They're outside of the cities. He says so. There's not just one group called the Essenes. There's a lot of different. Essenes.
That's actually. Yeah. Hey, do me a favor. Can you say that again?
What I just said.
Last part again. Yeah.
Josephus describes the Essenes as being in all these different cities and being all over the place. So I think when you talk about Essenes, it doesn't mean just one thing. You can have you can have groups of Jews that are adjacent to Essenes that had disagreements with those Essenes. There might be Qumran are probably Essenes too. So John the Baptist might be one of these, and I think the Essenes come from the school of the Elijah, Elisha, the people who aren't
100%.
necessarily in Jerusalem type thing.
100%.
Yeah.
No, thank you for that trail. By the way, Christians, if there are any Christians here, you must learn from people who disagree with you.
Thank you.
I learn from Christians all the time. Dominic Crofton, Dale T. Ellison. I learned so much from these guys.
If they have the stones to come up and debate publicly in a forum like this, trust me, a lot of people talk about it. Not a lot of people are about it. It's
respect.
And the reason I'm saying this is because this is going to set me on a trail. What you just said about the Essenes is going to set me on a trail, and I had to put that in my notebook to follow it up. That's why I asked you to repeat yourself. So thank you for doing it. I'm just saying, Christians,
in Jewish war, what Josephus says about the Essenes will take you down a whole rabbit hole. I would read that. Anyways, but are we good on this one?
Yes.
No, no. Thank you for the reference too. Yeah, it's just very important that this is fun, guys. Like you be secure in your faith. I'm 100,000. I'm more secure now than I was an hour ago. But
that's good.
Then you can free yourself to listen to this guy knows Greek. He's spitting it off. Like this is great, man. So I'm just very excited because once I find a rabbit trail, like it's the worst thing in the world because nobody's gonna see me for years. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So Back in Pan is dropping dimes on us. I love it. Thank you, Bakken. By the way, good last super chat. By the way, I didn't really know what you meant by Edomite, but now I do.
Well, yeah. There we go.
Simon Magus equals Egyptian equals Paul. Paul took new surname. I think this is a question, or what do you guys think about that?
I don't buy it. Simon Magus,
wild, bro.
Yeah,
I love Bakken. No, Bakken's a friend of mine on Facebook, by the way.
Me too.
And look, thinks outside the box, right? You could tell, but I don't buy the Simon Magus equals Paul thing.
Me neither.
You could see why someone, especially reading Acts, might conflate the Egyptian at least with Paul, as you just heard Vinny describe earlier. But I don't think they are the same. But either way, you can see why that. But the Simon Magus stuff gets trickier because you got to go to the pseudo-Clementine material. And there are scholars, it's very not a common idea, where they conflate Paul and Simon Magus in some ways, but I don't think they're the same. And if you want further material, there's a book that was just recently written by M. David Litwa. I didn't bring this argument because it was too much, Vinny. He argues that the Simon problem, there was this guy, Simon, the Christians call Magus. It's more of a pejorative. It's not a nice word.
Or Simon the Samaritan is another way they call him too.
Yeah, that war theologically happened in the 2nd century. He's attempting to try and date the book of Luke Acts. Bro, because the closer you get to the 1st century, the more accepting of the Simon is by church members. Right.
Simon had his own sect, his own school called the Simonians, who were a legitimate sect of Christianity in the beginning, and then towards the beginning of the 2nd century is when people
What do
start
you
to
mean by legitimate sect of Christianity?
Well, he was a baptized Christian.
In Rome. They were in Rome. They had their school. They were among the Christians. They just had a lot of different diverse.
So were the Judaizing heretics. They were among Christians.
Yes,
they had schools. They were in the churches. They weren't legitimate Christians.
It's not till the Justin Martyr 150.
Wait, do you think the Judaizers are legitimate Christians?
In the beginning, they probably were, but they probably were hated on.
But the people that defined the religion, right, said that they weren't, right?
Well, the people.
No, because that's you're saying that the proto and orthodoxy is one straight line all the way from the beginning to the end. You're just assuming
is relative to the Judaizing heresy.
Well, you and I will have a debate on this. I'll debate you next on this topic right here.
On the Judaizing heresy?
No, on is there a proto orthodoxy that we can fully point to? And are these heretics? Is
there a basic Christian charisma?
Or the question of, are these heretics seen as heretics while they were alive? I would say no.
You don't think Judaizing heretics were viewed as heretics? I think in Clement of Rome's
time, Clement of Rome in the 90s didn't see the Simonians as heretics.
I'm not talking about Clement. I'm talking about.
That's what I'm saying. I'm talking about early on.
Before you guys get into debating 5 other topics, I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks for tagging me in here. I just want to make one.
Name?
Stephen Nelson. Yeah, Stephen Nelson. Subscribe on. Just go to the crossbible.com website. That's what was up on screen, and then you'll get links to my social media from the footer there. You can follow me. Everybody subscribe to Cross Bible. And I just want to mention, so the point about martis, the Greek word martis, right, is martyr. So to Neil's point, before the New Testament, it only ever means somebody who witnesses something or who attests to something that they witness.
Nothing to do with dying.
Well, in Acts 22:20, Luke uses the term in reference to Stephen, and he calls him a witness, but it's in association with his death. And then in Revelation 2:13, we get basically the very first occurrence that's like indistinguishable. It's in the Christian sense of a martyr. And then after the New Testament, it's like martyr is somebody who dies. Before the New Testament and throughout the New Testament, it means somebody who witnesses something or someone who testifies to something they witness. And the exceptions appear in Acts 22:20 and Revelation 2:13. So I will sign off with that.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah. All right.
Bro.
Guys.
Real quick, before we get too much into this, I just want to say, wait, what was my point that I was going to make? Shit.
All right, Stephen.
I lost my train of thought now. What was I just saying?
We were talking about Judaizing heresy, kerygma.
Yeah.
I don't want to get
the universal definition of what a Christian was.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Now I remember now. Even, can you guys hear this, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Even Acts is not even even the book of Acts is not even really making Simon Magus into a heretic. It's giving him a negative picture, as in someone who tried to use money to buy the Holy Spirit, but it ends off with him getting saved and baptized, and then it moves on.
I agree.
So that's what I'm saying. They were part of the church.
You yourself said that the earlier you go, the friendlier they are to him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're agreeing on that. All right.
So that means that
where's the disagreement then?
Acts was early. So then by the 2nd century, we were mad at Magus, right?
No, I said after 150.
But we were mad at him, right?
After 150.
The later you go, you said the later you go, that we were mad at him.
In between 150 and in between Justin Martyr and Irenaeus is when they start to hate him.
Yeah, it ends with bro getting baptized, and that's it. It's just positive.
Let me make one comment on that, but I really do want to keep going, guys, because we're going to be here for 5 hours.
I like it.
And it's fun.
I got 20 minutes left, guys. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I know, let's
keep going then.
There's a book by M. David Litwa that people should check out where he does think there's two things going on. There is an early tradition in Acts where he's a baptized Christian, but there's another tradition in it. It's a heresiological slam of Simon Magus. But anyway, that's
that's after. Okay. Anyways, Plot Tots, thank you for the 5. Is Christianity widespread in the 1st century? If Christianity is spread, why does Pliny write to? This is what I said. Why does Pliny write to Trajan asking who they are? Can Vinny explain that? That was the same question I asked you. So you want to repeat that or not? Or
Vinny already answered this kind of.
I already explained it. I'll do it again. When President Obama was reviewing his presidency, he said he only got good in the last year and a half, 2 years. But then he said, the irony of that is it was still time for me to go. And the lady says, why was it time for you to go when you got good? He said, my misunderstanding or my inability to call the Trump movement, my underestimation of the Trump movement is clear that I missed it. And my point in saying that is to say, this man has all the information in the world. Information is instantaneous. He could have got the Groypers. He could have got all that stuff pretty early if he had been paying attention. And so the fact that he still underestimated the power of the movement with a guy as huge as Trump, the idea that the elites in Rome would automatically know about the spread of Christianity when Christianity was distinctly an apolitical movement in the sense that you had the Jews and there was always this sense of the Messiah is going to come and kill everybody and take over. And then you had slave revolts with Spartacus and those guys. We were the only group that was non-political. We didn't want anything to do with war, anything to do with stabbing people up, whatever. So in the Roman mind, the only thing those people cared about was, are you going to be a threat to Roman power? And since the early Christian church was not a threat to Roman power, it didn't percolate to those guys. But then when you look in current narrative, I understand what you're saying, but the majority report is that Nero blamed the Great Fire on the Christians, etc. So regionally speaking, there are times when people are aware of Christians, and there are other times when they're not. But even with Nero's fires, there's still a political sort of undertone to that, obviously this is not good for him politically. He's got to find a scapegoat, so he goes after the Christians. So even that was a political context. So the reason that Christianity was being widespread, it's just like Nero's household. Do you think the Christians in Nero's household, if that happened, just realistically, do you think they were going around to Nero saying, hey, man, we're Christians? That was happening right under his nose. So that's how I'd answer that question. That's not troubling at all.
I think it's a good question, but yeah, I'm not going to keep harping on that. Let's go to the next one. Wait, where am I? Did I just lose my spot? Let's see. We are
my buddy, Anglo Autodidact.
Anglican Autodidact. Thank you for the 10. Congratulations on your first debate, Derek. Very much appreciated that super chat. Thank you.
Really good job. Really good job. Seriously.
One of my best Christian friends.
Nice. Vilena, thank you for the super. Jesus died at 33. He physically couldn't travel the world. Oh, she's trying to keep it in the $2 super chat. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. He died at 33. He couldn't have physically travel the world. Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point.
I agree.
He also rose at 33, so he could.
Yeah, I guess. Doc Claromanot with a 20.
Holy smokes.
If Luke is pre-70, why does Acts show a unified, ordered church when Paul's own letters show a chaos and conflict? Why is Galatians 2 clash with Peter smoothed into harmony? That's post-conflict systemization, not live history.
That's my question, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of those things where I go, okay, this person didn't read. No disrespect to you. This person didn't read Acts. Okay, so Peter baptizes Cornelius the Gentile. Jewish Christians come up to him and rebuke him. They get mad at him. There's the unity. Then Paul and Barnabas get into a sharp debate with their Jewish friends over these Gentiles. This then creates the council where there's all this arguing going on. Paul never gets quoted in the Jerusalem Council. Never. They just quote Peter and James. Okay. So nothing but conflict. And then here's the crazy part, guys. The diaconate. By the 2nd century, the diaconate was a prestigious position in the church. You even see it in the pastorals. If you're going to be a deacon, you got to be this, that. You don't see that in the book of Acts, actually. You see the diaconate in the proto stage, and then it gets hardened during the pastorals. But the diaconate is very interesting because here we go. We've got smoothed over harmony, post-conflict systemization. The diaconate came up because the Hellenized Jewish women were not getting the same support as the native-born Jewish women. This is a 1st century conflict. Hellenized Jews are Jews that have basically, Alexander the Great, the Antiochus, they have been Gentilized, basically. Meanwhile, the real Jews who stayed true to it and remained in Judaism believed that they were better than these Hellenized Jews. That's a very regional and very time-specific problem. That's how the diaconate gets introduced, a racial class system clash. And it doesn't get resolved because the diaconate is introduced. There is no, and after this, the Hellenized Jews hugged the Hebraic Jews. There's none of that.
I think that's a good point.
The most prestigious, one of the most prestigious offices in the church, we're told came about because of a dispute about racism and classism. And then when the apostles say, do you know what the apostles say? The apostles say, man, we ain't got time to freaking wait tables, man. Like, what is this? Get somebody who knows what to do and deal with this problem. Nobody looks good in that passage. And that, we are told, is the origin story of the diaconate. That does not give us a smoothed over whatever. Finally, the two best friends you know who the two best friends were. You know who the original bros were. Paul and Barnabas were the original bros. And what happens? What happens is Paul and Barnabas get into a sharp dispute over what? John Mark, who punked out. So now we got Paul being unmerciful to John Mark. He doesn't want to take him. They have a dispute. They break up and they never reconcile. Paul later, you know why I'm doing this. Paul later says, hey, John Mark's a good guy. Bring him. He's useful. But he says nothing ever again about Barnabas. So this idea that the book of Acts is presenting this unified, harmonious church is simply untrue. That is not true. Furthermore, and I'm going to let somebody bring this up. There is no conflict between Peter's portrayal in Acts and Peter's portrayal in Galatians. As a matter of fact, Paul accuses Peter of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy means you believe one way and you're acting a different way. That's hypocrisy. You think one thing, you have something inside of you, but then you're living a certain way. So when Paul talks about Peter, what happens with Peter is he won't sit with the Gentiles because he's afraid of the pressure, because we've already seen in Acts that he's under pressure. And so what he does is he bows to the pressure. He's not making any theological statement. He's bowing to the pressure. And Paul says, yeah, but that action has theological ramifications. We already have a race issue in the church, Peter, and we do, because we just explained it to y'all. So what Paul does is he says, you are being hypocritical. You know good and well that this is not right. Now, where does Paul get the idea that Peter agrees with him theologically? Where does he get that idea? He gets that idea because they were both there in Acts 15. They both agreed to what James said, where James said, we can't put the Gentiles back under the law. So Paul saw that. He goes, then if you agreed with that, then what the hell are you doing? Why are you leaving these people out? By the way, Peter has a race problem. We see that. When that's the reason why in the narrative, I'm sure we'll agree, the first thing that Peter says is, hey, Jesus, are you now going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Peter is very, very Israel focused. Jesus is like, we're not talking about Israel, bro. We're talking about the whole world.
You know what's so funny about that?
Go ahead.
You know what's so funny about that is I'm not muted, am I? Okay. The Essenes, in Josephus, the Essenes are described as of Jewish birth. They show greater attachment to each other than the other sex. So he's pointing out that they had this weird disdain towards converts, and then he says they occupy no one city but settle large numbers in every town. So these people are all over the cities, and they have they have a sect that's like totally like anti.
About the Essenes?
Yes. So it's weird that the way the Christians are described is almost similar to what the Essenes were like, having like a Jewish sect. The Jewish birth ones think they're better than the ones who aren't. So I think you might be onto something there, man.
And that is a distinctly first century problem. Yeah. It is not a problem in the second century.
Well, maybe the first, I would say first half of the second, I think it still might be there.
It's not. Find me something. Rome completely decimated Jerusalem in 70 AD.
Josephus is written in 96.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. I'm talking about the seats in Laban in 93 in the Christian church. We are not talking about Hellenized Jews versus Hebraic Jews. That's a long gone issue. Okay. So the book of Acts does not present thank you for that Essene thing. I'm going to need you to give me that reference though, bro.
I'll send you a screenshot. I'll send you the reference. Yeah.
Yeah. I really need you to do that. Please do not forget. Yeah, I will find you. I have ways.
Jewish War Book 2. Jewish War Book 2.
I'm taking way too much time here. That's my answer. Pushing to you.
Jewish
Derek.
War Book 2. You'll find it. Yeah.
I'm way too long.
I kind of want to wrap the Q&A up here.
Yeah, let's continue through this.
Because I think we could get into pedantics, and now Neil's involved in the Q&A, and you know what I mean. And then it's like this will go on forever, guys. And we have a lot we can dispute. We
got a few more super chat. Let's get through these. Bach and Pan.
Maybe we can get somebody that didn't get a chance to ask a question, or how many questions do we have left?
We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more super chats.
Let's just get him.
That's why I'm silent. I'm just
lightning round.
Let's get him quickly.
Yeah.
Paul was
no comment here.
If there's no question, I'm just going to read it and say thank you. Paul was known as the Egyptian. Felix sent Simon the Cypriot, known as the Egyptian, to Drusilla to get her to abandon her husband and marry Felix. Good point. Thank you for that. JP with the 5. Early or late, Acts 10:43 promises all the prophets testify that whoever believes in Jesus receives forgiveness of sins. This is false. None do. Any thoughts?
Well, I disagree. He forgave all my sins. He'll forgive all your sins too, if you ask him.
Okay. Pat, thank you for the 2. D, this guy's a clown. He's reaching N2DA unknown. Thank you for the 5. Illuminati Nate atheism. Vinny needs to debate deconstruction zone on messianic prophecy because Jesus didn't fulfill them all at all. If you actually read the text, Derek Big W.
Thank you. Thank
That
you.
would be a good debate.
Well, do you know who deconstruction zone is, Vinny?
Don't. I'm pretty judicious about who I debate, guys. I ain't gonna lie to you.
Yeah.
Well, we can talk.
Yeah, we can discuss that later. Well, I'm not going to get you to commit now. That's stupid. Anyway, Bach and Pan, Danny Biss, thank you for the 5. Essene comes from ose, doer of the law. Ebionite means of the poor. Both refer to the same group who fulfill the lower priesthood. We were just discussing this. I think it's a good point. Anyways, Alan, a friend of the channel, both channels, thank you for the 5. McGrath sees Luke as using Baptist birth story. Best explanation for me is Luke Acts is redacted as is implied in prologues.
What's the Baptist birth story, Derek? I'm unfamiliar.
Talking about Martha. You know how she gets pregnant? Mary's cousin gets pregnant with John the Baptist, I believe, is the cousin of Jesus in Luke.
Yes. Yeah.
The leaping of the Holy Spirit and all that kind of stuff. So they're saying, and just so I want to read this carefully, McGrath sees Luke as using Baptist birth story. Best explanation for me is Luke Acts is redacted as implied in prologues. I'm not really sure where they're going with this specifically.
Maybe there's a parallel with the baby leaping. You know, like there may be some parallel. You know what I'm saying? Like pagan parallel where babies leaping
to hear what the
Marcion.
I'd be interested to hear what the Marcion scholars think about any redactions in this part.
Marcion scholars who think that there was a prior Marcion gospel do not think that there was a prologue initially there. They think that there's a debate, right? And the consensus is that Marcion redacted a Luke. But there is a growing number of scholars who are questioning that and thinking the reverse. So I don't know what the answer is. And
this is a good question, though. Something to look into for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. And this is the last one. We got them through them really quickly. Back in Pandemivis, you dropped so many, I think we should give in time for one more. Acts rewrites characters in the same book. It intentionally creates separate personas for the same person. Simon Paul, James Stephen, Matthias, etc.
You want me to jab at this first, Vinny?
Yeah, I don't really, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't really have anything to say about it.
I think if I can read into Bakken here, that Luke and Acts are paralleling the stories of Jesus and the suffering of the early church that we see with Peter and Paul. So I think the author is trying to give you kind of like this motif where Jesus says, you know, you're going to do greater things than I will. Obviously, he hints at these things, but also he's going to suffer. So will you. And they end up going through parallel kind of experiences. And I think Bakken's trying to say that you're going to get characters within the story that are going to parallel as well. I would just, the one that comes to my mind, and it wasn't Simon, Paul, or James, Stephen, and Matthias. It was simply how you have Peter going to Cornelius when Paul's mission was to the Gentiles. So you have this reversal of roles that takes place where Peter is doing what usually you would see in Paul's letters, Paul would do to the Gentiles. That was what I had come to mind, but I don't know what to do.
Well, that's why I loved that pagan quote so much.
The kick against the goads?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because Paul said he heard that in Hebrew. So what he's saying is that Jesus is quoting a pagan to him in Hebrew. That's like considering Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles. Like and we know that Paul could from memory quote pagan sources, right? Acts 17, in him we live and move and have our being. That's about Zeus from Epicurus, right? So
Euripides.
Yeah, Euripides. Thank you.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. You're talking about Acts 17. Yeah. There's
in him we live and move and have our being.
There's actually two ancient Greek sources. Remember this, Neil? We don't know this. It's not Euripides. I'm sorry. It's there's a guy named
Epicurus.
There's two of them.
It was somebody, but
ancient Greek. Yeah, it's ancient.
Epimenides.
Like
Epimenides.
Epimenides. I'm pretty sure it's who is this guy? Hey, what's your YouTube, bro?
Me?
Gnostic Informant.
Oh, Gnostic Informant.
Okay.
They're going to find a lot of. You're going to want to debate me on a lot of things. You watch my channel.
You got to follow. You got to follow this guy, man. Okay, so. But no, I love that. I love that. Jesus is talking to this guy in Hebrew with quoting a pagan. That's so beautiful because Paul is Jewish, but Jesus is going to send him to the Gentiles, bro. It's perfect. I love it.
Yeah,
anyway,
Epimenides in turn is actually citing a Homeric version, a version of Homer that talks about Medea saying the Cretans are always liars. That's where the phrase actually comes from.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And that's Titus. He says this thing is true. The Cretans are lazy. Okay. Here's one thing I will say, though, because I agree that there is a sort of parallelism between the suffering of the church and the suffering of Christ. And you see this in the whole Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me thing, right? Where, no, I'm persecuting the church, but you persecute the church, you're persecuting Christ. Here's the thing, though. Back to parallelomania. If that's the case, we've got Jesus, because of the jealousy of the Jewish elite, gets dragged before Pilate, right? Gets an unfair trial, and then he gets executed. And Annas, the high priest, is there front and center. He's the guy. And we know that the Passover laws state that everybody had to have Passover in the house of the patriarch, which means that the Annas who killed James was in the room when Jesus was getting tried by Annas before he got sent to Caiaphas. And then that guy later becomes the high priest. And what does he do? Pilate leaves. He kills James the Just, the brother of Jesus. So the son of Annas kills the brother of Jesus. Perfect parallel. Perfect. The church is now continuing in the suffering of Christ. John, the brother, stands as Jesus. Albinus stands at Pilate. And then you can end it with Nero and Paul. Perfect. And it's not there at all.
Yeah. And we would disagree on this one.
Last question.
I would just say,
Alexander?
I would just.
You gotta let Derek. You gotta let Derek.
I gotta get.
You gotta let Derek respond to that.
Yeah. I've been
Sorry.
quiet because I'm just trying to help us get through this. But I would say, again, the only thing I would put the reason I'm hesitant on that is I don't think that he would want to narrate the death of Paul and potentially the resurrection of Paul, because we have an Acts of Paul where he does that and he resurrects. And I don't think Luke wants to take away resurrection theology from Jesus and give it to Paul. But that's my assumption. I have no way to prove that.
Is it the only thing that he could have done? He could have only mentioned the resurrection?
No, it's not. And again, I'm making a speculation, just like your assumption is that the silence is evidence that it never happened. So we're both making arguments.
Explaining it by saying he didn't want to include the resurrection because you only want Jesus. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
But why not because you don't believe that the discussion with Pilate and Jesus was real in Luke, right?
I don't buy that happened historically. No, I think it's more of a.
So Luke fabricated that.
Yeah, I think he fabricated a lot.
But he doesn't fabricate the Nero discussion.
He doesn't even mention it because he wants to keep away from Rome killing the Christians, and that's why you see constantly with Jewish people. The one example that I have that you've given me food for thought for is why not narrate the brother of James, right? James, the brother of the Lord. Why not that one example? Again, that's a good point. But at the same time, when you do look at that, there's no Romans executing any of the Christians at all. They're always found innocent in the eyes of Rome. It's always Jews involved. And that's why I keep bringing that back up. By the way, I'm not the one making this up. Daniel B. Glover, who wrote the book Reassessing the Early Date of Luke Acts, he highlighted a lot of these things.
So your explanation is we just don't want Paul killed because the second century church would have taken Paul dying as a martyr as a defeat of the gospel. Is that the argument?
No, the argument is that if you have him die when the gospel is going unhindered, it ends with a victory. The gospel is going forth unhindered. Now you have to bring in the Neronian persecution, which brings in the fires of Rome, which accused Christians of committing the greatest atrocity, like 9/11 times 10 in the ancient Roman world. Christians don't want to be seen as guilty. So every turn he's showing that Christians are innocent in these acts. And even in the Luke part you brought up that I think is fascinating, that Jesus himself is put to death, right? He's tried, he's found guilty, but is he? Even Pontius Pilate has to wash his hands. They make him look innocent even when he has to follow the deed. And
are you saying
Jesus to Herod, which also tries to put some blame on the Jews. And now Herod has to send it back again, and Pontius going,
is Josephus doing the same thing with the death of James, making the Gentiles look good and Jews look bad? He's got the same agenda?
I don't think Josephus has the same agenda as Luke Acts.
So It was just that the Jews were attacking the early Christian church, and the Romans didn't have a hostile attitude, because we see clearly there, Albinus demotes Ananus.
Mhm.
You don't even see anything
Josephus.
like that. You
Right.
don't even see anything like that in the book of Acts.
Right. You don't. That's a different book. I would say that Luke has a different agenda.
Not a
than
different book. What are
Matthew.
you talking about?
Josephus is a different book from Luke Acts.
No, I'm talking about the your constant statement that the early church is worried about making the Romans look good.
When did I say
Instead of
that?
saying-
I said Luke Acts is doing that.
Okay,
Because
good.
Mark
that's
doesn't make-
specifically
Mark-
that's specifically what I'm dealing with.
Mark is actually
But-
willing to talk about the Romans in incognito ways that I think are damning toward the Romans by calling the
Would it be-
legion the swine and casting them into all that. That seems legion language. That's anti-Roman material, I think, in Mark. Luke does not do that. Luke is very clear to try and make the Romans look good, in my opinion.
Just give me a second. So, like, do the Romans look good in the Josephus situation with Annas?
The Romans? I mean, he is writing in Rome. I can't imagine.
What I'm talking about is, and Ananus gets demoted
Mhm.
because the people complained to Albinus about the death of James.
Right.
So, do the Romans look good in that one?
I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, they
You don't know?
They do demote. They take
You
it
don't
out.
know.
Well, I'm trying to
Okay.
answer your question. I'm trying to answer your
right.
question because at the end of the day, Josephus isn't ashamed to bring up like the atrocities someone like Nero might have committed and things like that. But remember, we're talking Josephus.
I mean, if that's your honest answer, it's cool. You don't know if the Romans are being portrayed as positive by listening to the people and then acting quickly to demote the guy that they complain about. You don't know if that's a positive portrayal. Okay.
I would imagine they're doing what they would do in any legal situation to try and actually remove someone they saw as acting in bad
I was
faith.
just asking you if it was a positive portrayal
I know, but
of the Romans.
I know, but you're
saying you don't know if it's a positive portrayal, so I'm moving on.
But you're spinning this in a way that's like trying to make me seem like I'm not fairly answering the question, though. It's like
No, you said that you don't know, so I'm just going to leave it at that. We don't know if that's a positive portrayal. Okay.
Do you know?
I think we're good on this, guys.
I think we're good on this one.
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Final question. Is Paul a false or a true Christian?
That's you, Vinny, because I think any Christian who claims to be a Christian, I'm cool with calling them a Christian. That's just me.
I don't. Yeah, I think, look,
Really?
Religions have distinctives, okay? So, for example, I can't walk around and say I'm a Muslim and believe in 58 gods, because the distinctive of Islam is that there's only one God. I can't be a Muslim and say that I believe that Muhammad is a complete false prophet. I can't do that. I'm something, but I'm not a Muslim. Words have meanings. Definitions have meanings, okay? So the Christian faith had a very basic kerygma. When Jesus was crucified, that wasn't the end of the story. He rose from the dead. That's the kerygma. Now, the interpretation of those events is what gets laid out in the rest of the New Testament. But the basic story is Jesus of Nazareth lived, he died, God rose him again on the third day. Everybody who believes in him will have a part in the next world. Everybody who denies his lordship will have their wishes granted and not be part of the next world. That is the essential Christian kerygma. He's coming back to judge living and the dead. Look, we have Bart Ehrman's the first one I learned from this. We've got the Carmen Christi in Philippians talking about Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he emptied himself and took on the nature of a servant. There was a lot of discussion about two powers in heaven in the intertestamental period, okay? There was a lot of discussion about there seems to be a second Yahweh figure. Nobody was talking about that second Yahweh figure becoming a real, genuine human being.
That's true.
That is a genuine sign of development, and it is also an extreme. Philo doesn't, and Philo is the closest one I have.
Philo brings the Logos as the second God. He literally calls it a second God too.
Calls it the second power, but the Logos never incarnates permanently as a human being. Never in Philo. So that is a genuine, unique Christian edition, whatever you want to talk about. That was written in Philippians in the 50s. So we already had a hymn about this. Think about that. Not that we had this is what the theology said. Regular Christians, people who could not read, turn that into a hymn. Jesus, who being in the morphe, you guys know your Platonics, right? Being in the morphe of God, did not consider equality with God something to grasp, but took on the morphe of a servant. Okay, that is genuine theological development very, very, very early. You also have the book of Hebrews, nightmare for late date people, nightmare. I can't even touch it. Hey, there's so many things that we could talk about, but here's we're getting the point.
Yeah, I did a whole video on the post 70 dating of Hebrews.
Please I would love I would love me and you. Let's me and you do Hebrews, no problem.
Okay,
but
all right.
Thank you guys for letting me go on. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. We had the early Christian church. We had this same thing in 1 Corinthians 15. I told you of a first importance. Christ Jesus died. Then we talked about suffering under Pontius Pilate, which is known as one of the earliest Christian creeds. So we've got very developed theology very, very early. Okay. And all that stuff is great to explore. But the fact of the matter is the kerygma is very simple. It's got to be simple enough for a random a tile worker in Crete to be able to understand. And it's this. You've done horrible things in your life. I've done horrible things in my life. And the reason the world is as fucked up as it is back then and now is because it's populated with people who are doing horrible things and only going out for each other. And so what Jesus presents us is the highest ideal, which is God. I'm just saying on a technical logical level, you create something that is like the super ultimate of everything that you can't go past infinity. And what Christianity does is it takes the highest possible principle and it brings it to the lowest possible place, crucified naked on a cross, to tell everybody this is the way. We're going to sacrifice. We're not going to fight. We're not going to go to war. We're not going to destroy civilizations. We're going to die for people. And if you follow me, you're probably going to die, but we're going to change the world. And when the new world comes, you'll have a part in it. That's the message. I commend it to you. Thank you for letting me have this last thing here to talk. And I just got to say, dude, for your first debate, if you're a Christian, I do not recommend debating this guy because you better show up tooled up because this dude did this in 4 days of preparation.
Thank you, Vinny.
That was a great debate.
I'm not a fan.
Thank you for your time.
I'm not a fan of people jumping into fights like this unprepared. You better be prepared if you're going to talk to this dude.
Sorry, I'm so tired, and I'm just like I'd have the energy if I was drinking Red Bull. No, but
dude, I'm so meticulous when it's debate time, like you have no idea.
Well, I want to say
it's like cool enough to go on and up.
If I may, I want to say thank you, Neil, first of all, for volunteering your time to come and do this for me. And again, if you ever need me for a final moderation, I'll jump in and be more than happy to help you. You know that. And Vinny, again, thank you for your kindness. And hey, you were sharp. You have me wanting to go home. I'm already in my home, but you know what I mean. Do my homework a little more. Try to, synthesize and get my head wrapped around this stuff more. So I think the final closing thing we should say to everyone is this: we can learn from both sides. And even if you disagree, hear it to sharpen your own understanding of things, because that's what it's all about. I think that's the important thing about these debates. It's for me and you. I don't think this is about a ha gotcha, ha dumbass, all that. It's much more about, we don't agree. That's cool. You saw us going at it, sword fighting. Now go read some scholarship, read the books, think it for yourself. And thanks, Vinny. Thanks, Neil. Let's wrap things up.
Yep. All right. That was a great debate.
Love the questions. And, it's 3 hours, 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
So really, seriously,
yeah.
Commendation to you guys. The average attention span is like 23 seconds now, some ridiculous number like that. So you got a special group of people here, honestly.
Absolutely. We'll keep the heavy metal going. And yeah, Vinny does a lot of music and stuff. So if you liked what you heard from Vinny, go check him out. Vin and Sori YouTube channel, VIN and spelled out, not the symbol, Sori, SORI, and you can go check out his YouTube channel. You're muted, Vinny. Sorry. Say that again.
Yeah. Hold on. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Yeah, I hear you now.
Like I said, I don't do debates because I don't like the gotcha.
But I've been studying this dude, and I felt like I can get a real honest, good faith discussion. Ain't going to be all the extracurricular bullshit. And I think we accomplished that, I get, whatever. And he didn't react to it, man. He just kept the energy like.
Well, there are
Right.
moments, but that's every debate. Like Neil said before we began, that was going to happen. So I really do. You got a super chat pop in. Is that a super chat or a membership or something?
Join subscriber.
Okay, so we're good. Okay, cool. Whew, I'm gonna go eat some damn dinner, guys. I'm not gonna lie. I'm hungry.
Hit that outro then.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Like, share, comment. Let me know in the comments what you thought. Who do you think did better? Where did you think both sides did good? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Again, constructive criticism. Until next time, we are MythVision, and you have just attained
true gnosis.
True gnosis.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.